Magnus tries to open a book containing the knowledge of the entire world. He speaks to Furan and Ren-El against the backdrop of a huge tree with roots destroying the earth. Evgen, a warrior blessed by the god Trigon, uses fire magic, but Magnus, a mage, tells him it doesn't work and fire magic is useless here. Evgen yells back that Magnus is useless and asks why he's like this. Magnus says that theories are just theories, and they don't always work, and asks if it could be otherwise. Eugen orders them to shut up and listen to him. He shouts at Furan and Ren, summoning fire. A cracking sound is heard, and the man screams in pain. Magnus says he can't harm the enemy and curses. The woman offers to help the wounded warrior, who is breathing heavily and lying on the ground. Hilda, the priestess, says it's her duty to keep her warrior alive. Evgen laughs and tugs at Hilda's robe. Misha, the female fighter, says this is a battle, not a place for flirting. Then Misha leaps into action. First, the creature growls and groans. Then the group is shown standing on the edge of a cliff. Evgen says they've killed the Death Ent perfectly. He orders them to hurry and collect the loot, warning them not to think about stealing. Evgeny informs her that the fruits of agility, strength, and reaction belong to Misha, and she says she'll try them then. She bites into the fruit, and her expression changes. She says it's incredible. Evgen says the fruits of defense, speed, and stamina are his, and Hilda will get the fruits of holy power and magic power. He explains that he's always needed a boost to his spells, but he won't argue, as the improvement is immediately visible with healing spells. Magnus says he apparently only has one mana-boosting fruit left. Evgen approaches and says he'll take that one too. Magnus says he'll simply increase his mana reserves and asks if it's not obvious. Hilda agrees and points out that the fact remains that Magnus was useless in the previous battle. Eugen explains that he used his skills far more often than Magnus. Magnus says he simply couldn't have done any damage to that monster if he'd been allowed to use other spells. Magnus clenches his fist. Eugen says it was probably a mistake to invite him to the team. He thought Magnus was a genius, but he turned out to be a complete disappointment. Hilda explains that Magnus is the first person who can read the sacred words, and that he complimented the team with these words. Hilda says he's a complete loser, and asks what else he can do. Evgen reports that it turns out mages are simply useless, and that physical force is clearly far more effective in combat. The man says they no longer need Magnus and orders him to leave, and the woman laughs along with him. Magnus says Misha heard them herself. They don't need anything but physical force. Misha asks if he'll just leave. The girl calls it a coward's act, and he says, think what you want. The man says he thinks this will interest Magnus by giving him a book. Magnus says the book is sacred words. Magnus says that this is all you need to know to defeat the Demon King, and tells them to relax, as the book was written by the gods themselves. He explains that there are many ways to counterfeit a book, but if it's a god's book, that's a different story. The man explains that they say only the gods and their apostles can understand the sacred words. All the monsters in this world originated from the evil energy of the Demon King, so as long as their king lives, it doesn't matter how many are killed. He explains that the monsters that were killed later returned. Magnus says this book contains all the knowledge of the world and understands why this happens. He says it's the same. The man reports that after 3 days, a huge tree-like monster appears. The man notices it and says it's a Death Ent. Magnus announces that this is a one-on-one fight against an unknown Death Ent. He then explains that the god isn't looking at him, and so he will take this chance. He screams sleep and attacks the monster. He explains that this monster is known for its resistance to special magic and weakening magic, and he believed in this, but every monster has its own weakness that it cannot resist. He explains that the monster is weak to hypnosis. Magnus explains that, according to the book, the Death Treant boss monster is a plant-type creature that resists all fire-type attacks and is weak to lightning. Fire magic is useless against this monster. Magnus explains that this means he must use lightning magic. He says that Evgen was deeply mistaken in saying that it was better to use only fire. He says that he should have trusted his instincts, admits his guilt, and says that he will no longer allow himself to be yelled at, using cunning, strength, and knowledge. Magnus states that they respect those who strive to stand on their own 2 feet, using only their own strength and wisdom, and that all this book can offer is information, and wishes courage and determination on the journey, emphasizing that fate is in the reader's own hands. Magnus then shouts, "Zach!" He tells the dying tree that it is dead, then stands still, after which he notices an increase in mana, level, health, speed, and holy power. Magnus says that with such a vast amount of experience, his powers have increased significantly. He explains that this book is simply a treasure trove of knowledge and is impossible. Magnus explains that the all-powerful book is how this story began. He explains that if he keeps leveling up so quickly, he'll need better equipment. He says it would be cool to get an S-rank staff, or at least a C-rank staff, but it's a very rare item that's unlikely to be found in a regular store, and even if he's lucky, it would cost a fortune. Magnus says he will repay those who allowed him to gain such power. He says that this must be the place. Then he approaches the building and goes down into the dungeon. Magnus says it's a great spell for controlling his falling speed, and that he's glad he still remembers it, and he didn't expect to have to enter through a chimney. He explains that according to the book, he'll be able to learn flight when he reaches level 29, and asks what free flight is like. Magnus reports that the book states that the mansion is currently empty, and explains that the place was used as the residence of the King of Wands. The King of Wands was considered the most powerful wizard in the Lakest Kingdom. He recounts how 10 years ago he was left to die alone in his own mansion, clutching a sack. Magnus reports that the S-rank staff of the Supreme was made entirely of mithril, which is why it is so light. Magnus explains that the staff is made of red crystal, a very rare material, and notes its size. He says that the staff could cost around 10,000 coins in a store, and even for 100,000, a huge number of people would be willing to buy it. Magnus says the staff's value is enough to live like a nobleman for 500 years, and he still can't believe it happened to him. He also reports that the staff's abilities are simply incredible. While using the staff, the damage of all offensive spells is increased by 79%, the effectiveness of support spells is increased by 86%, and the user has a 51% chance to reduce an enemy's resistance to special magic. He reports that he collected all the items he could find throughout the kingdom, then used the information from the book to learn about other treasures, and also targeted groups of bandits who had anything of value. He explains that he managed to save lives. The slave girls thank him for saving them. Magnus says it's hard and says he's only just realized he's not immune to cute girls. The girl asks if she can know his name. Magnus explains his name isn't worth mentioning, but he can't refuse those naive eyes and offers to walk her home. He says that he might meet them again one day, but that's another story. He counts and can't believe it, counting to 10. He sits with his arms crossed, with ordinary C-rank staffs lying in front of him. Magnus explains that items of very rare rank can be found in stores, so selling that many at once would attract too much unwanted attention. He says he'll keep the items he needs and sell the rest. Magnus says he needs to find a suitable place and time to sell the items, first finding a merchant he can trust, as these are all valuable items and must be well known. He then reveals the Mall Merchants Association, the largest association for the sale and creation of magical items. Evgen says they don't even have what they need here. The girl says they didn't think they'd find it right away. Hilda explains they've only just started looking and need to be patient. Magnus reports that they quickly found a replacement, and this is who they traded him for. Eugen notices Magnus. Evgen says they're looking for a magic staff and knows they're very hard to find anywhere. He asks if Magnus knows where to find one. The man says he might just have a whole bunch of them lying around in storage. He informs him that this is a quest from a nobleman named Dima and asks if the boy has heard of it. Evgen urges Magnus to hurry and asks him to tell him where he can get a staff. Magnus explains that he's curious about the purpose of a staff if their team doesn't have a mage. Magnus asks if they really have that much money. Hilda explains that the church supports the warrior in his endeavors in every way possible. Magnus says that's understandable. The saints of the church always speak of God's endless love for them, even if it contradicts their principles. He says, okay, let's do it for 1,200. The girl thanks him enormously. He explains that for the sake of profit, Hilda bowed to someone she openly ridiculed, but he's sure that inside she feels humiliated and furious. The man wonders why the woman would go so far for a C-rank staff. Hilda hands the staff to the man. Evgen explains that the man seeking the staff is offering to trade it for a mithril sword. He says such a sword can be sold for 5,000 coins at the store. Evgen laughs. Magnus says he's happy for them. The man reacts with surprise. They thought he was upset about it, but even if he was, it's not that big of a deal. Magnus says he doesn't care. The man wishes him luck on his mission to kill the Demon King. Evgen says you still don't want to go back to them. Magnus asks, should you? Magnus says they need to find a place to sell everything now and asks which stand to choose. The man approaches Magnus, trying to talk to him, and Magnus responds with a question. Magnus remembers that this is one of the girls captured by the slave traders. The girl apologizes and asks Magnus to go on a date with her. He gets nervous and asks what. The girl looks at him awkwardly. Magnus tells them not to say such things in public, as it will only put them in an awkward position. The girl apologizes and explains that she simply couldn't help herself. He says that a capable magician like him shouldn't jump to conclusions, that he should think things through carefully and be careful with this. He then says that he can't believe she wanted to thank him in this way. He explains that such a thing couldn't happen to him. The girl reports that at that moment, being kidnapped and desperate, she was very scared, thinking about her immediate future. The girl explains that she was devastated. The girl explains that then they came. She reports that they were so wonderful and kind that they saved everyone. Magnus explains that because he's still young, it would be a lie to say he's not interested in a relationship, but he still has the mission to kill the Demon King. He reveals he has no choice but to tell her he's inexperienced in relationships, at which point he becomes flustered and apologizes. Magnus explains that he only wanted to tell her about his mission and doesn't understand why he panicked, while admitting that he doesn't love her and maybe something else. The woman says she's not worried about their lack of experience and says she's happy to offer everything she has. The man replies that it's a great relief and explains that his name is Magnus. He blushes and sheepishly explains that he was kicked out, so now he's just Magnus. Magnus stutters and says he'll have the following Wednesday off, and the girl stutters and asks what they'll do about this date. Magnus says, next Wednesday. Then Magnus lies on the bed and tells her that if he puts business and profit behind him, then he really wasn't lying to her. The man says it's his first time, and he thinks love is so beautiful. The man says a dating book said arriving early for a date will build a strong foundation for the rest of the relationship. The man explains that he thinks that's silly and simply illogical, so he'll arrive at the appointed time. Magnus apologizes for keeping her waiting, and the girl replies she just got here. Magnus thinks that would be nice. The girl says she was so excited she's been waiting since morning, and Magnus calls that sweet. Magnus suggests they go to a place that serves excellent food. He asks if she'll let him hold her hand, and thinks it would be wonderful, then wonders what if she doesn't. She abruptly shakes his hand off, after which he notices her hand slipping and says it feels so nice. The girl invites Magnus to go with her. Magnus says he really loves pancakes. The girl asks if he's been here before. Magnus says it's the first time. Magnus says girls are amazing. Magnus blushes. The girl says that according to the book, they make excellent cakes here, but not many people know about this place and thinks that in this case, reputation is not important. He explains that too many people can spoil the appetite. Magnus asks the girl how the food is. She says it's the most delicious thing she's ever tasted and eats it with gusto. Magnus explains that the sweetness of the apple pairs beautifully with the tartness of the berries, creating a euphoric fusion of flavors. He says he's glad he found this place and that it's worth all his searching. The girl says it's the best food she's ever eaten. He says he's glad. The girl asks where they're going now, turning to Magnus. Magnus says it touches so softly. Magnus says, oh. The girl and Magnus say the food is delicious. Magnus and the girl walk down the street together in the evening. He and the girl are kissing. He pulls away abruptly, his face expressing surprise and embarrassment. The woman says it's Magnus's first time. The man says it's his first. Magnus announces that there's a festival in town tonight. The girl screams and runs away. Magnus explains that if she doesn't want to go, she can stay home. Magnus says that as long as she is happy, he is happy. He says that this book is incredibly useful, and with it you can achieve incredible things. Magnus asks if this isn't the girl they were trying to save. He explains that the side quest is to rescue Mal in Enzo's village. Magnus explains that Mal was an ordinary 14-year-old village girl who couldn't get out of bed due to a strange illness. He explains that the illness was unusual in that it was immune to the holy Angia cure. He stands with his hand raised to his face and looks up. The man says everyone already knows what the leader discussed yesterday and says they're counting on him. Magnus explains that this is a normal situation for him and he can easily handle the monster, but he's still nervous. He asks what the man who appears from the bushes wants. The man steps forward with a determined look. He starts to speak, but is interrupted. Glans, the guardian of the ant village, says he's honored that his name has been remembered and asks for help, explaining that he has a favor to ask. Magnus says it's difficult to remember everyone in such a situation, but he has a good memory and asks if Glans would like to fight the monster with him. He says he has extensive combat experience and is much stronger than the village's regular guards. Magnus asks why this is necessary, for the items or to protect the village. Glans says he just wants to save Mal and explains that they're childhood friends. He's 4 years older than her. He says they're the same age. Magnus is surprised by Glans's age, as he thought he was in his 30s. Glans says that he's in love with her, and with such appearance it is too difficult, so he is not going to tell her about his feelings. Glans explains that he simply wanted to become strong enough to protect her, so he left the village, joined the army, and then returned to become a guard in the village. He says he was very worried when he learned of her illness, and therefore, after hearing rumors of the mission, he couldn't stay. Magnus explains that he should have already known he was a mage, and therefore wouldn't be able to protect him in battle. Glans says he still wants to, despite the danger involved. The man says there's no need and offers to use himself as a shield. The man reveals that he's actually been perfecting his skills for this day. Magnus says that if they insist, he has no reason to refuse, and admits that the warrior wouldn't interfere with a mage like him. He explains that as a man, he can understand how another feels, but no one wants to die without a reason, even someone like him. The warrior replies, "Fine." He reports that this is roughly how they'll proceed. Glance says good, he's remembered everything. Magnus asks, judging by his skills, what level of warrior Glance is, around 7th or 9. Magnus explains that he can view his basic stats. Magnus and Glance notice something in the sky. The man tells Magnus to be on guard because something is approaching. Magnus confirms the need to be on guard. A creature appears below, causing a loud roar. He and the man with the halberd face off against the forest giant boss monster. Magnus casts a spell, simultaneously announcing that the effectiveness of support spells is increased by umpteen 6% thanks to the Staff of the Supreme. The man talks about creating a magic shield, magic armor, and an aura of fire. Gland says that although he has been told about this before, it is still amazing. It seems as if an endless amount of energy flows through his body, and he receives such power from Mr. Magnus himself that he considers it simply a miracle. Magnus says that no normal person would dare attack the monster head-on, as it's very difficult to overcome fear in a battle with such a terrifying monster. However, his mage skill, mental resilience, has the same effect as a priest's calming skill. He explains that Glans became a fearless warrior thanks to his tenacity and his feelings for Mel. He delivers a powerful blow to the enemy, who lets out a loud roar. The man thanks Mr. Magnus and reports that it is now much easier for him to defeat the enemy. He continues his attack, and the enemy lets out another loud roar. Magnus says it doesn't matter how powerful your attacks are if you can't hit your opponent. He explains the forest giant's eyes and asks why he can't damage them. The image shows Magnus moving quickly, increasing his agility. Magnus states that everyone has a weak point, so he will constantly cast weakening magic on him. Magnus explains that while increasing your agility, it reduces the chance of being hit. In other words, dodge while you can. Magnus says that's excellent, and explains that if he were fighting alone, he would still use this strategy and ultimately still win. He says the time to kill the boss has been significantly reduced thanks to Glance. The man reports that according to the book, the boss has slight fire resistance. Magnus explains that it's a 5-fold fire buff, increasing critical damage and increasing single-target damage. Magnus reports a direct hit. Magnus says it's a good thing he cast a magical shield on him. The man breathes heavily and says, "Ugh." He announces that it's all over and suggests they go back. He explains that without Magnus, he wouldn't have had a chance to survive this attack. The woman says she welcomes Mr. Magnus back. The man says thank God they both returned safe and sound. Magnus says it's really important to touch it. A boy says the monster's roar was so terrifying, and another boy says he even felt the ground shake. The woman speaks to Mr. Magnus. The woman smiles. He notices Mel. Mel says that the monster in the forest was actually the cause of her illness, and asks if that's why they decided to kill it to save her, then tells her how she can thank them. The man says that if anyone should be thanked, it's not him. The man says he still can't believe she's healthy again. Mel reports that this is the guy she needs to thank. The woman asks the armored man if he's Glance. Magnus reports that after she left, Glance caught up with her and offered his help, going to great lengths to save her, becoming her shield and not cowering before the monster, rushing into attack without sparing any effort. Magnus explains that he is not like those idiots randomly chosen by the gods and calls him a true hero. He says the atmosphere is friendly and he thinks everything will be fine. The man says he hears sobbing. The girl explains she's very happy. The man asks, "Chalk?" The girl says she really appreciates him doing such a thing for her. He remains silent. Mel says she didn't think they'd come back alive. She explains that she'll never be able to understand people like that anyway. He announces that upon his return to Lacusta, he must definitely go and visit Arya. At the celebration, the men raise their cups and shout hurrah to greet each other. A man and a woman with flowers in their hair are eating shashlik and drinking drinks. The guys are asking to hurry up and have a glass of Glance with them. Magnus reports that the chief. The man says he really wants to give Magnus some kind of reward, but he's afraid that in such a poor village there's nothing that would interest the great mage. He says that the items from the boss are more than enough, and this is not even a bluff, but the truth. Magnus reveals that this is what he's been aiming for all along, and that he's been studying the book's information about the forest giant for a long time. He explains that there's a 79% chance of receiving an item called the Heart of the Thunderwood, and reveals that he's finally gotten his hands on it. If you give crafting materials or components to a mystical blacksmith from the dwarven race, he can forge a unique magical item, and one of the important materials for this is the Heart of the Thunderwood. Magnus explains that with the shield shards and the heart of the Thunderwood, he can obtain a new magical item that will greatly aid him in his upcoming battle with the Demon King. He also says he doesn't understand the purpose of these items. He informs her that he will now need to find the mystical blacksmith. He leafs through the book and reads that the mystical blacksmith Bazerf is an eccentric blacksmith who runs a workshop in the artisan's quarter and is considered an important person. Magnus picks up the book and says everything is fine. This is the kingdom of Lacust, the capital of Lacustia. He knocks on the door and asks, "Excuse me, is this Mr. Bazerf's house?" and then asks if anyone is home. Magnus says he had to leave Arya alone to come here early, but he still couldn't meet him. She asks if it's time for Magnus to leave, and he replies he'll be back as soon as he can. Magnus notes that the book says he's very grumpy. He tells Mr. Bazerf what happened and asks who dared attack him, calling him a hero. Mr. Bazerf breathes heavily and says it might have been Yugen's group. Magnus explains that this bastard was so brazen that he started attacking people. The blacksmith says he doesn't take anything for free and doesn't particularly trust people. The man explains that it's a health potion and advises drinking it quickly, as it should help. The man explains that those people ordered him to make weapons, then robbed him, act like bandits, and yet still call them heroes. Magnus says he'd like to pay 8,000 gold, but he doesn't have that kind of money and doesn't want to return to the inn. He then offers to exchange a high-quality potion for a spear. The old man says he understands, and Magnus thanks him for the potion. Magnus thanks the man. Bazerf stands up and asks what brings Magnus here, warning him not to say that a mage like him would need a spear. Magnus laughs and says he's heard that Bazerf is the best blacksmith in the area. He informs him that the boy will still owe him 2 more of these potions. Magnus laughs and says that if that's the case, he'll give Magnus a discount. He explains that Bazerf has a huge belly. The blacksmith laughs and explains that he used to be a womanizer and asks if he's good-looking. Bazerf says that Evgen stole his favorite hammer and offers to return it the same way he defeated the Demon King. The blacksmith explains that without a strong enough hammer made of adamantium or mithril, he won't be able to craft quality items, and for blacksmiths, having a great hammer is as important as having a good staff for a mage. The old man says he'll explain all the details later, but it looks like they have a chance to get an Orichalcum forge hammer. He explains that they were lucky to borrow a flying carpet from the association, otherwise the journey would have taken a whole week, and at this rate they'll get there in 2 hours. The head merchant, Arya's father, reports that a huge deposit of rare metals has been discovered in the Great Megaros mine, where an Orichalcum forge hammer is located, and asks what Magnus will say about the quest from the city's ruler. Magnus says that, in that case, no matter what happens, they must obtain it. This is the entrance to the Great Megaros mine, and the man remarks that the entrance seems too small for the mine. The blacksmith explains that all sorts of resources were mined here in the past, so it's no wonder the entrance is so huge. He suggests flying in directly on the carpet. Magnus says it's time to start. Bazerf reports that this is the result of human greed. He explains that, unable to leave this world, they continue to wander the mine, calling them idiots in a pitiful sight. He reveals that there are dwarves among them and calls them simply a couple of losers. Magnus casts a spell and destroys all the skeletons. The man says Magnus has destroyed them all. Magnus strikes with his spear, shattering the bones of his enemies. The man explains that Magnus was much stronger than he imagined. The girl tells him there are more monsters ahead, and she says he's scared. The girl says it's cute and hugs Magnus from behind. Magnus says that although they can't get lost anyway, thanks to this book he was able to memorize the entire map of the mine, where to go and where it is better not to go. He says, this is the end. He delivers a powerful blow to the advancing skeletons, shattering their skulls and bones. Magnus says it's nothing. The girl reports that everyone has disappeared. He casts a spell, then creates a portal through which the leg enters. The workers then emerge from the portal and greet each other. Magnus says the guy was able to create a portal to Lacustia from here. Bazerf reports that the guy is truly amazing. The man announces that it's now their job and urges them to start digging. The man believes they need to dig right now. The man shouts the count out loud, raising his pickaxe and urging them to strike the ground. Magnus says they'll wait until they're finished and then return them to the city. Then Magnus says they can start looking for the hammer in the meantime. The merchant Malma apologizes for the rush and asks what he thinks about marrying his daughter. He asks what? The man explains that Arya is a very intelligent girl, and they are well suited for each other, so they have every chance of living a long and happy life together. Magnus agrees, but remarks that the proposal reminds him of someone. The girl tells the man that it's not a good idea, as Magnus will be busy fighting the Demon King for the near future, and she understands how important it is to him. The man says that trade will decline if the Demon King destroys the world, and admits that this is true. He apologizes for what he said without hesitation. Magnus says not to worry, everything is fine. Magnus thanks Arya, and she says she's very lucky to have met him. A week later, Magnus asks Bozerv if his order is ready, and he invites him in, explaining that he spent a lot of time collecting all the relics to create the masterpiece. He says it's simply unbelievable, and that he can't believe his eyes. Magnus says it's a magical combat golem. The blacksmith says it's his finest work and even engraved its name, Gladius. He says that the work of a blacksmith of this caliber is priceless, and thanks Bozerv, explaining that with this thing he can reach the deepest parts of the Megaros mine, but it's awkward to ride. Bozerv yells, "Stop!" and asks who he is. Magnus says they can test it later and asks them to do whatever they want, but be careful. The man says that, speaking of the mine, they need to destroy the boss in its depths. It's the reason there are so many undead in the caves. He explains that there's a 6-level difference between them. He says that if this guy comes into the game, everything will change, and he explains that this boss will be a good opponent as a test. Magnus says they can just relax, and Bozerv replies that he hopes to survive. The man says that's great. The inscription tells of the great mine Megaros. Magnus uses the manosphere. Bozerv says, I should just relax and not worry about me. Magnus informs me that the man is indeed an unusual blacksmith. The man replies that, of course, in the depths of the Megaros mine, a man reports seeing a huge skeleton in front of them. Magnus tells them to stay behind and not interfere, lest anything happen. The man notices that the figure in front of them is enormous. He explains that this fog is called miasma, and according to the book, low-level adventurers take damage just by touching it, and fighting in it ends in death. He stands in front of a level 34 bone dragon, which makes a piercing sound and performs. Magnus explains that this is how skeletons are summoned, and orders Gladius to protect him. He says everything is going according to plan, and while Gladius distracts the skeletons, he can focus on killing the dragon. He casts a spell. The man warns Magnus, asking if dark magic works on the undead, and Magnus asks him to just watch. The man says it's a stone. The man says it's clear now, great move. Magnus attacks the dragon. The man says he can't believe the creature just grew a second head, and asks if it can even be defeated. Magnus shouts a spell, attacking the monster. Magnus says everything is fine and asks to believe him, despite the attack being useless. He resists the attack with all his might, while reporting that his resistance has increased, and also noting an increase in defense, thanks to the A-rank Guardian Angel Ring. Magnus says he's done with it and suggests they begin. Then Magnus shouts a spell. In response, a dragon shadow appears, making sounds. He tells you to watch carefully. The man asks what he's doing, and the man in the upper left corner expresses confusion. He explains that shadow magic drains the target's mana. He reports that the enemy spent too much mana summoning skeletons and regeneration, and Magnus reports that he is now completely out of mana. He announces that the fog is disappearing, and the enemy will no longer be able to regenerate or summon skeletons. The scene shows a rock crushing the monster's skull, and the skeleton's shadow being destroyed. Magnus reports that the monster can only attack head-on now, explaining that ultimately, it's just a stupid monster. The monster screams and attacks, shattering the stone. He says, stone. The scene depicts a destroyed dragon skeleton crumbling into pieces. Magnus announces that it is their victory in the end, and notes the overwhelming victory and many level increases, including holy power, agility, magic power, fortitude, reflexes, agility, stamina, and reaching level 30. He says that's fine, of course, but the problem is that the higher the level, the harder it is to level up. He explains that it's the staff of the fallen dragon, a reward for killing a dragon, S rank, and asks what they have there. According to this book, the main quest is to kill the Demon King. Other quests can help in various situations and are called side quests. Magnus mentions side quests, including exploring a secret cave and assisting in killing vampires, and also asks if anyone can share a potion. He explains that many people are in danger because of the Demon King, and he must do everything he can to help them, and also explains that leveling up and getting a few treasures would also be nice. The man shouts at Narses, asking what it means that he no longer needs items for the quest. The scientist Narses reports that these flowers are no longer of any use to him, as one good man brought so many that he managed to conduct all his experiments and still have some left over, while the others spent a whole month working on the task. Magnus says that they risked their lives for a whole month to get these flowers. The man says they've already decided to forget about the quest. The woman explains that if Hilda hadn't accidentally seen the flowers, they wouldn't have even remembered them. He yells, demanding to know who the bastard was who thought he'd steal the quest from him. A man announces that the great wizard is Master Magnus. The man shouts that Magnus is trash, and another man explains that this is not true, and explains that Magnus is different from ordinary warriors. He is not only much smarter, but also more efficient. He says he completed the task much faster than the others, and asks how they will justify themselves now. Then he demands silence, and declares that a warrior doesn't need excuses. Magnus says he dares to mock a warrior, and hopes he'll consider the consequences. The girl says that since Magnus left, he's been going crazy more and more often and wonders how many times this has happened. Yugen explains that he really does dare to attack a warrior. He says that if it was just a joke, then everything is fine and starts laughing. The man laughs back. He thanks Mr. Narses for understanding and continues laughing. The girl hopes that he has learned his lesson and that it will be better if he becomes more patient. A man screams that he wants to kill another. Magnus says sorry and The girl tells Evgen, "You went too far." The man reports that rumors circulate that he even managed to defeat the dragon that dwells in the depths of Megaros, and after hundreds of years, it was finally defeated. The man explains that the king was so impressed by Magnus that he offered him nobility, but he refused. The girl says that Magnus, after leaving the group, only tried harder and helped many people. The woman says she was rude to Evgen and hopes he's okay. The man says a mage can't be better than a warrior. The girl asks Evgen what he's planning. Evgen says he's better than Magnus and will show everyone who's better. The woman tells Magnus that if he has any problems, he can contact her and asks if he's really a scholar and not some kind of merchant. Magnus says he thinks he's heard about that before. The woman explains that the heroes group has gone to fight Durbanboat. Magnus, surprised, he reports that before this they made a fuss and announced to the whole city that they would defeat him, and that was 3 days ago. He is sure of it. Magnus reports that thanks to side quests, he's already around level 32, but Yugen's group hasn't yet managed to level up that much. He explains that Durbanvode's special ability, Bind, can immobilize 2 people at once if they're below level 32. Magnus says that, simply put, it's pure. He remains silent. He puts his hand on the floor and says that if they have already been killed, then he can only pray for them. Magnus reveals that he planned to go there at level 34, but now he's still short and wonders if he should risk it. He says he has urgent business to attend to and asks for forgiveness, then turns and leaves. The man asks if he's decided to follow them. He curses and calls himself an idiot. Magnus says he feels the same way and finds it stupid, but he simply can't abandon them. The man explains that he'll only laugh at Magnus after he returns with victory over Durbanbot. He's only 35 years old, and they can talk about their exploits later over a couple of drinks. He says he'll lend it to him then, and will have to thank Narses later. He explains that if they set out 3 days ago, he'll catch up quickly. On the way to rescue his former group, he'll encounter his most powerful enemy. Magnus stands, clenching his fist, and stares straight ahead. In the distance, 2 people can be seen standing by a statue in the Great Hall. He announces that the first volume is already on sale, and tells how the main character, without any ceremony and without a doubt, enters the fortress of a dangerous enemy. Magnus reports that the book says that even the weakest creatures living in this fortress reach levels 10 to 13, so he does not think that the time he spends here will be like that time in the Megora's mine, and therefore must defeat all the opponents in every corner of the fortress before. He says that in any case, even this won't be a huge problem for him. He explains how to detect the trap and ways to find hidden objects. He hears a ringing sound and says that it should be here. Magnus says glory to Durbanbote-sama, explains that this is a secret corridor and he will save a lot of time if he goes through it. He says that if you think about it a little, this password sounds too pompous, and at the same time praises Durbanbote-sama. The man reports that it seems the protector of the secret corridor has finally appeared. A level 26 Mithril Golem appears. The man explains that this giant... Magnus calls for Cladius to move forward. Cladius, in bear form, runs forward at full speed. Cladius delivers a powerful blow, shattering the ground. Cladius looks ahead. It states that it is a magic item, magic armor, and a magic shield, and also lists strength, fortitude, dexterity, and agility. An armored bear appears nearby, and a message appears about increasing the level of holy defense, fortitude, dexterity, and agility. Magnus says that you need to keep it like this, and that's how it is. He reveals the spells, Armor Penetration and Freeze of 4. He explains that despite the target's high magic resistance, freeze magic can still slow their movements and make them less maneuverable, and then says, well. Magnus says he knew he looked like an ice golem right now. Magnus then delivers a powerful blow to the golem. He says that this is also possible. The bear and he move forward after the blow. Magnus reports that his instincts are always spot on, and as he expected from the boss, he dropped a whole bunch of super rare items. He explains that the Magic Backpack 3 can hold a huge number of items. He says the side quest is complete. He asks, so, this fortress has at least 5 floors. He takes a step and says, bam. The top right says this is the 5th floor of Durbanvot's fortress. On the bottom right, Magnus lips ahead in surprise. On the left, Magnus says, well, well. He tells Evgen that getting here was too easy. The man yells at Magnus, asking what the hell he's doing here. Magnus announces that he's come here to defeat the evil cursed general, Durbanut. The girl says they have the same goal and asks where Magnus's team is. He says he doesn't have any teammates. The girl asks what he means. He explains that he meant he came here alone, but adds that he has this big guy with him, whom he can call his teammate, and explains that his name is Claudius. The woman shouts at Magnus to wait. The man also asks him to wait. The woman explains that she meant Magnus Sama and asks Magnus Sama to join them to fight against the enemies shoulder to shoulder. The woman explains that, ultimately, Durbanvot is the enemy of all humanity, which is why they must unite to defeat him. That way they will have a better chance, and she hopes that Magnus will return to their team. Magnus shouts at Hilda not to decide everything on her own. The woman asks if he will fulfill her request. The girl closes her eyes and says she is ready. He says he will. The man with the ears and the girl behind him listen attentively. Magnus refuses and says it would be foolish for him to join them. The man and the girl react to his words with surprise. He says he's wasted a lot of time talking and needs to go. The man yells at him to wait. He asks what they need again. The man says the boy doesn't realize what he's standing on and asks if he knows. Magnus explains that on the 5th floor this pattern appears in almost every place. Magnus says he didn't even notice the pattern. He tells her that Evgen wanted to finish him off and explains that Claudius recently pressed the switch, but the trap didn't activate, which is why he started to worry. He explains that he should thank her because he needed to get here. Magnus announces that he has found a magical item that is essential to defeating Durbanvot and explains that his goal is the topmost floor. Magnus then takes off. The upper right corner indicates that the action takes place in the throne room on the top floor of Durbanvot's fortress. He says he has no desire to accept praise from a rotten asshole like Durbanvot. Durbanvot congratulates the people on their success. The armored character states that the heroes deserve praise for being such insignificant insects, especially considering their level and status, and asks if it's not obvious. Magnus shouts that he disagrees with being called insignificant insects. The knight announces that if the hero becomes his servant, half of the Lacusta kingdom will belong solely to him. He laughs and says it's very funny, then asks if it's true. The girls in the background look frightened. The demon says that the demon lord ordered these words to be conveyed to him, but he has no need to subjugate trash like Magnus and believes that Magnus must die here and now. Magnus shouts a battle cry and attacks, increasing his strength and defense, as well as his endurance. The girl strikes with a spear. The woman responds with a powerful kick, after which the girl and the man run back. The man says the word, wave. The man then creates a powerful explosion, which involves the girl and the woman. Magnus reveals that he possesses a unique hero class skill, Awakening Armament, which unleashes the true power hidden within weapons and armor, and shouts that he will finish off the enemy. The scene then shows a sword breaking and falling to the floor, and a man in armor raising his hand. The dragon laughs and says there's something wrong with the sword, asking if it's made of low-quality material. He yells out, "What's going on?" The blacksmith explains it's a flame sword, forged by the best blacksmith in the kingdom of Lakist, and the man assures him he saw it. Magnus says there's nothing engraved on the sword, not a single word. The creature laughs and declares that then it's a second-rate, no, inferior sword. A girl with a bow on her head struggles to hold onto the sword while another girl with claws prepares to attack. He says that attacks not imbued with magic are ineffective against anyone above level 30. The girl reports that despite all their attacks, they haven't dealt him any damage, and his strength is simply unimaginable. He explains that they should remember that. Magnus says that their worthless gang truly doesn't have a wizard, and expresses regret that even their team is incomplete. He then asks if the other man is listening. Magnus then curses and delivers a blow that sends the other man flying back with force, making sounds. He says he can't fight anymore and asks them to leave. The girl and boy express shock and fear. The hooded woman says they can't leave him alone and must help. The woman says she's going to heal Magnus. Magnus suggests running away. The woman asks, "What?" He says that he only has Hilda left and suggests that they run away together right now, as far away from this place as possible. Hilda asks Magnus to wait for her. The girl is surprised to realize that he has been an unimaginable coward from the very beginning. The woman confirms this, saying that. The man laughs and says this guy has no right to call himself a hero and that it's ridiculous. The girl and the guy express concern and say, "Damn." The man says he's going to thoroughly enjoy them all right now and starts moving forward. The monster says that after being locked up for a long time, he is terribly tired of masturbating, and therefore he takes full advantage of the girl. The man tells you that you can't resist his fist-like tentacles unless you're at least level 32. The girl screams and asks you not to lick here. The girl asks him not to bite her nipples or push that thing inside. The man stands behind the girl, wrapping his arms around her. Below, on the right, a girl with a bow on her head explains something to the man in armor, who nods. The girl steps back, and the hand with eyes and tongues moves towards her. The girl says no. The man says resistance is futile. The girl asks him not to do so and says there's no one around to help, begging anyone to help her. The girl remains silent and makes a quiet sound, expressing doubt or indecision. Magnus announces that he's here to take back what's his. Magnus asks what's going on. The masked man smiles. He stands with a staff. Next to him is a beast in armor. The girl shouts Magnus's name. He looks forward. The man in the helmet announces that he is a level 32 wizard and asks what the hell he's doing here. Magnus refuses. The man with the mask asks if Magnus really wants to die and offers to show him why everyone is so afraid of him, and then ask a few questions after the fun. The man with the mask laughs. The girl and Magnus watch the scene unfold. He says that all people are afraid of him because he's an unbearable chatterbox who talks complete nonsense. The evil, damned General Durbanvant says that he admires his courage. Magnus says this is the first strike and delivers a powerful blow with his staff. He explains that it's left stump. He says that since he's already level 32, the fist tentacles can't harm him, and the enemy is simply using their body parts for physical attacks. He yells at Cladius, and then says that once again, Cladius. Magnus reports that according to the instructions in the encyclopedia, the left Kulmaga's weakness is fire, and casts the fire spell. The man reports that the left and right stumps are level 35 monsters, meaning they're 3 levels higher than him. The man explains that his status has been raised to the maximum, and he can negate the weakest attribute magic with the Staff of Black Magic. Magnus says he can defeat him. A message appears stating that the left doll has 0 HP. The man says that perhaps he shouldn't have underestimated Magnus's magical attacks. The girl says that's incredible. He says the other guy hasn't seen the coolest yet. The man asks what. He takes out a magic backpack and starts using it. Magnus reveals that he obtained this staff from the bone of a dragon and explains that the zombie dragon staff is capable of controlling fresh dead bodies and reviving them as undead, but only once, requiring a high consumption of mana points, and the undead die if not maintained. He explains that a regular wizard wouldn't be able to maintain the summoned undead because it drains too much mana, and only he can do it for a week without any problems. He also says that he doesn't have much free time to waste on some pathetic cockroach. Magnus says the 2 monsters are equally strong and asks if he should buff his undead. He then uses the strength, toughness, and agility buff, followed by a message about strength, defense, and agility buffs. He states that he came prepared and explains that the weakness of his right arm stump is the element of cold, after which he uses the spell Freeze 4. Magnus shatters the glass, then raises his staff and causes a fiery effect. The zombified left and right puppets begin to move. He says that now he and Durbanvant will fight for real. The knight says that's impossible and shouts that Magnus is just a human. Magnus explains that the knight's weakness is lightning. He says that the end is coming now. Magnus reports that the heavy modification element, Thunder IV, has been activated. He explains that the nickname, Evil Cursed General, is more than just a nickname. The Great Wizard warns the man not to underestimate him. The girl says it's incredible. Both of them are so strong, and the guy says their battle is like a battle between gods. He laughs and says it's useless to waste time and effort addressing the Great Wizard. The girl is surprised he's still alive and asks if he's not mad. Magnus says he cut his heart out of his chest and hid it in one place, and as long as his heart beats, he will remain alive. He also says that people are very stupid and he is very different from them. He says he's also aware of this. He explains that the magical item is essential for defeating Durbanvant. Durbanvant responds with bewilderment and says that it's impossible. Magnus says that this is his heart, and the masked man exclaims at amazement. Below it says that this is Durbanvant's heart. He asks them to stop and not destroy him, and then refuses. The man and the girl look at what is happening in surprise. Magnus delivers a powerful blow, shattering the ground and causing a loud roar. He then breathes heavily, watching the impact. The man reports that as soon as he arrives in town, he's showered with thanks, that there will be a formal ceremony in a few days, and they thank Magnus. The man says he's completely drunk now. The man explains that after the general's murder, the monsters throughout Lacusta have become greatly weakened. The husband, Magnus says he can't appear on the city streets without a problem, calling it a problem. The man confirms that this is indeed the case. A few days later, an open-air banquet is held in the castle of the Locusta Kingdom, followed by the triumphant return of the mage. The man says that defeating Durbanvant is truly incredible and expresses gratitude on behalf of all the people of Locusta. The girl says she doesn't understand such things and that it's such an honor to hear this. He says that Arya is awesome and that compared to her feats, this is nothing. Arya asks. Magnus explains that everything is fine, only his dress is dirty, although it has only gotten better, and he coughs. The girl says he looks a bit pale. She says that if he wants, he can lie on her lap, like on a pillow. The girl smiles and says that if he says so, then it's good. The woman tells Magnus she was looking for him. The woman says she wants to come closer. The man explains he's not feeling well right now, so it's best to talk to him later. The woman agrees. The man says, okay, fine, and tries to calm down. Arya tells him that if he needs anything, he should let her know, she'll take care of it no matter how far he goes, and that she'll always be there for him. Arya explains that she's the daughter of Locusta's largest company, and that the man announces that the celebration cannot begin without a guest of honor, and invites Magnus to accompany him. Magnus asks him to step away from him and addresses the man as, Your Majesty. Captain Tenzin of the Knight's Guard reports that this is Durbanvant and warns Magnus to be careful. He asks, what? And the boy next to him says that he has already begun to lose his identity and notices that he has turned pale. He explains that. Magnus reveals that this is the same Eugen who recklessly challenged Durbanvant and then cowardly fled, abandoning his teammates. Eugen indignantly declares that he is a hero and has never fled a battlefield and asks Magnus never to do anything like that. The man says he believes the hero's words, and has no doubt that this mage is hiding Durbanvanta within himself, noting that people's trust in him is on a whole new level. The man explains that if anyone has any doubts, they should use their identification skills and asks to examine the person. The woman. Magnus says he has 271 magic power points. The man panics and shouts, what level is 36? Magnus explains that Durbanvant was level 40, and he leveled up quite a bit with it. The man explains that he was focusing on raising his stats. The man with the mustache says that here is the proof. The man with the disheveled hair says that now everyone can see. The man with the mustache explains that no one present could ever have achieved such a level or such a status. The man with the disheveled hair stands with his back turned, and the people around him are surprised. The woman explains that even if the king can see through his assessment that she is truly human, probably because the court mage stopped at level 17, he has a hard time accepting the fact that a human could reach such heights. Magnus explains this. The girl shouts, wait and tell me. He says that's how her comrades think of her. The girl screams that he's a liar. The man explains that she's just a stupid woman who fell under Durbanvant's influence and asks her not to take her words seriously. The woman says that's true, and she's choosing between words. A man and a woman complain that it's too noisy. Magnus explains that it's easier for Durbanvant to just kill the hero on the spot, and then what's the point of all these games, and then says that's exactly what he thinks. The girl with the bow on her head looks surprised and tense. He explains that, at the moment of his death, Durbanvant transferred his soul into him, thereby turning the man into a powerful demon, and accuses his interlocutor of selling his soul. The man shouts that he dare not slander him. Magnus reports that the possession of a great evil has manifested. The text states that Tenzin is a level 40 Durbanvant. The monster delivers a powerful blow, causing immediate shock to those around him. He reports that this blow looks strong. A woman and a man scream about a demon and let out a cry of terror. Magnus lowers himself to the man lying on the ground. The girl calls out to Magnus and asks if Arya is okay. Magnus clutches his chest and feels pain. The girl says Magnus is fine and won't interfere. He says it's a good decision, as expected of his partner. He explains that they're running low on energy, meaning it's time to get rid of the enemy and celebrate with a drink. The man calls Magnus. The woman announces that from now on, the king is under her protection and orders Magnus to focus on the battle. The king says he understands. The woman takes the king in her arms. The man takes the sword in his hand and says, so. Magnus says Tenzin is a monster that must be destroyed, regardless of Hiro-sama's opinion. Magnus explains that he plans to capture the interlocutor and then seize the king and the kingdom, and he was promised half the Locusta. He says that you envy money, women, and power, and that it will all be his. Magnus says he knew the other guy was dumb, of course, but not that dumb. The man yells at Magnus for what he's saying. He says he never liked the smug attitude in the past, and says he'll teach him some manners now. He strikes, causing the other mage to make a pain noise. He explains that he's really only a level 36 mage, and that while he may be a hero, he's still below level 20, the other mage. Magnus says he can't scratch him and asks Eugen if he's okay, as he looks ill. Eugen yells at Magnus to stop getting cocky and declares that a mage can't be better than a hero, and Magnus is about to find out. Then Eugen strikes Magnus. The man screams, "Die," and he screams, "Die," several times in a row. The girl looks at Magnus. Magnus asks Hilda why she's doing this, and explains that Eugen is a man who sold his soul to a demon. Hilda says she's already told him about this. The woman says that God's will lies beyond human thought, and the same can be said of Taigan-sama, the angel of God who chose this man as a hero. She says that a hero is a hero, and there is no doubt that even in this seemingly foolish act, there is Taigan-sama's will. The woman says she can only support and serve her. Magnus says he can't fight Tenzin Durbanvon while the two monsters are bothering him, calling them fanatics. Magnus explains that these monsters irritate him. The girl screams for Hop. He calls Claudius. He says he can finally take care of them. Magnus reports that the mana drain is enormous, but restoring it isn't a problem. It's all about HP. He explains that if this turns into a protracted battle, he'll be at a disadvantage. He tells Misha that she really is an idiot and orders the demon to shut up. The girl says that she fell in love with Magnus from the very beginning because all he did was look at the hero. He screams, surprised that the girl is talking about Evgen. The woman laughs. Magnus yells at the bear to get out of the way. The bear asks if he can fix it in 5 days before the banquet. The man says he'll do it as quickly as he can and notes that someone has been with Magnus for a long time. He says that someone fought alongside him, which is why he leveled up. The battle scene suggests he was a trusted friend. The man with the staff says he's had enough and now realizes he's still immature. The girl asks Magnus if he wants her to die. The woman smiles and the girl reacts in panic. Magnus asks if he's ready to die yet. He delivers a powerful blow to his opponent. The man screams, asking what happened to Magnus. The girl and the woman express shock. The woman says Hilda is an idiot and will be very sorry, and the girl orders them to kill her quickly. A man announces, "Rise," and the words, "Magnus's secret weapon," appear next to it. Several characters watch the scene with surprised and frightened expressions. Magnus reports that a great evil has reappeared. The man reveals that it is Durbanvont the Undead. He says that Evgen even turned pale. The man in the helmet, horrified, calls him Durbanvont. The girl asks why Durbanvont and is surprised that he defeated him that time. The woman says this is Magnus's final weapon. She explains that immediately after Durbanvont's death, Magnus used his Staff of the Fallen Dragon to transform him into an undead being and subjugate him. She explains that it took a great deal of mana to maintain the weapon for these 5 days, and the woman says she has no chance and remarks that he trusts the other girl, to which the girl confirms this. He orders Hilda to take her dirty hands off Arya, and Hilda yells at them to stop and grabs Arya. Hilda then looks on in surprise at what's happening. Magnus tells her she just fainted and was lucky, and that she shouldn't look at what's about to happen anyway. The armored man screams in horror. Another man asks what Durbanvont is doing here and why the hell Magnus is using him. He says he is Durbanvont and asks if he was ready to fight him. The man shouts at him to be quiet and declares that he won't believe it, accusing him of lying and demanding an explanation from Tenzin. The monster tells Magnus that he will be killed for his stupidity. Magnus screams and trembles with fear. The man says he behaved terribly but asks Magnus to stop, explaining that they are companions and traveled together. Magnus asks if they were on the same team. The man says he will never contact the other person again and swears to it. The man asks for forgiveness, stuttering as he repeats it. He says it would be fine if only he. Magnus says he does what he wants and asks what the other man was thinking when he destroyed Claudius or endangered Arya's life. The man, trembling and covered in wounds, says he's a hero, a man destined to save the world. He says the hero has enough strength to be called a hero. The man warns that if the hero is killed, the world will be doomed, and asks if he is ready to take responsibility. He replies that he will. The man says that he planned to do so in the future. The monster tells Magnus that he's definitely the type of person you shouldn't anger, and Magnus replies that he can't even remember the last time he was angry. Magnus then uses Instant Shock and Thunder IV. He reports ahead, Durbanvont, and says that he too should get what he deserves. The monster is receiving rapid blows. Magnus announces that it's time to finish. He announces the name of the heavy attunement, Thunder I4, and casts the spell Tilt, Ha, and Del LN, explaining that it increases attack 5-fold, increases penetration, and increases critical strikes. He explains that he holds the ring on his left hand and uses it to. Magnus tells Fran L&L that he's using the heavy Fire 4 attunement. Magnus shows his hand surrounded by flames and reveals that he has a hold on his right hand. He says to GH, clenching his fist, surrounded by flames and sparks. At the bottom right, he stands surrounded by flames and electrical discharges. On the left, a pillar of fire with lightning is depicted. Three characters marvel at the idea of fire and thunder uniting, calling it a base dragon and comparing it to legends. Magnus reports an explosive burst of combined magic. A woman, a man, and a girl are screaming. A man in armor and other people are also screaming. He stands with his eyes closed and holds small figurines in his hands. He announces that he will destroy everyone who stands in his way. Magnus says that everything went well, and now we can breathe a sigh of relief. The older man announces that the great mage, Ansama, may enter for an audience. He walks toward the throne, and the crowd greets him as a hero. He says, "Not so much, your majesty." The man in the crown replies that he is their hero. The man says the king himself doesn't believe it. The king of Locusta announces that he is naming Magnus Demon King Slayer, and from that moment on, Magnus will become the kingdom's hero and will eventually receive his well-deserved reward. The crowd shouts for the great mage and demon king slayer Magnus, wishing him luck on his journey. He says that thanks to the king of Locusta, his authority can be compared to that of a hero, and the deity Tygon chose Yugen as the hero to fight the king. Magnus asks if there is anything he can be even more proud of, then grips his staff tightly and raises it up, causing the crowd to loudly cheer and support him. He announces that he will return to his home village. The girl says that she thought she could clear her father's name by killing the Demon King along with the hero. The girl reports that Evgen never ceases to amaze and is still alive despite everything, and asks if the heroes are so strong. The man asks if they'll just run away. The girl explains that this guy turned out to be special. Magnus reveals the hero's hidden skill, End of Heaven, which will prevent the hero from. He says he was exiled and calls it ridiculous. The girl says they were lucky to escape the death penalty and suggests leaving the kingdom. Magnus says he'll always be by the heroine's side, and that they'll always be together, turning to Hilda. The man with the child says he's the guy who kicked his son last time and shouts, "Hey!" The man insists that even if he's a hero, that doesn't give him the right to behave like that, calling him a villain who sold his soul to a demon. The crowd demands he leave, saying there's no place for him here. The woman warns Magnus not to make a fuss here, or else he'll be dealt with. Magnus says the main thing is that Misha didn't cross the line, and explains that anyone can make mistakes. The girl says she wonders if their sins will be exposed to the world, admitting that she's lost her way and is just as guilty. Magnus explains that they'll throw stones at Evgeny. The girl asks where he's going, and he replies, "To Eravana." He says he's choosing between Eravana and the Desert Empire, and the girl says he's already got everything he needed. The man in the top right explains that the treasure of the Heavenly Kingdom is the red and blue stones that fell from Tenzin Derbervant, and also explains that the official certificate of the Locusta Kingdom allows one to obtain all kinds of amenities in Locusta and beyond. The girl in the bottom left explains that Magnus reports that Gladius protected him that time, and the man says that enough is enough. He reports that without Gladius, nothing would have happened, and that it would have taken at least another year to defeat Derbenvant. The man asks if Gladius helped with this. The man says that this guy will also help and become a shield until he crumbles to dust. The man explains that this is a combat golem forged from the soul of two fists and high-quality mithril, and presents a Gladius MK2. Magnus says they met again, partner. The man asks if he still uses that unreliable flying cloth, and wants to know what kind of stupid name it has. He explains that the cloth is called Naruse, and tells him that if he defeats the Demon King and becomes a legend, his name will be recorded in history as a means of transportation. Magnus says he's south of the city center near the central fountain. The girl asks him what he's doing here so early and reminds him that they agreed to meet at lunch. Magnus explains that he remembers their first date and that she said she'd been waiting for him since the morning, the girl says. He tells her that the girl has good intuition, and she explains that it's not intuition. The girl says that she had a feeling that he might be waiting for her here and calls it heart-to-heart communication. Magnus says he didn't think it would be too bad, and the girl asks if it was boring waiting. Magnus explains that it made him realize he's living too fast and that he needs to relax a little every now and then, and the girl says she understands. The woman says she thought the same thing when she was waiting for Magnus on their first date, because every day she is very busy with her daily work, since she is the daughter of a merchant, and that this is a wonderful time to forget the usual dizzying work and just relax. He says that this is a real luxury. Magnus says he'll definitely visit her. The girl asks if she can count on at least once a month. Magnus says that's impossible. He says he can't stand that they can only meet once a month, so he will come back every 10 days or even every week if he can. The man says that everything is still closed at this time of day, and the girl says that there are some things that can be done at this time of day. Then a message plays about Yugoku Guoden's escape. The final panel reveals the setting, the Yerevan Empire. Magnus states that he needs a new permit to visit the ancient ruins, shows a letter from the king of Lacusta requesting cooperation, and asks if Lacusta isn't a small country with an equally short history. The desert king of the Aravan kingdom denies the signature. He says he wants him to deal with the Doomsday Gang, explains that they attack his dear vassals and merchants and then deal with them cruelly, and orders him to deal with them with the power given to him by God. He refuses, and the man orders that this wicked man be taken. Magnus explains that hundreds of years ago this kingdom flourished and was almost the largest, but now it is even smaller than Lacusta. He says he hopes they didn't disturb him and asks if he, Dono, is awake. Magnus says he's been wondering who's coming. Crown Prince Heidel and Second Crown Princess Farah announced their arrival. He says such an unfair imprisonment cannot be forgiven. He explains that an apology implies reasonable compensation and shows the permit to visit the ancient ruins that his interlocutors wanted. Magnus reports that 99% of the ancient ruins in Aravan can be searched with a first-class permit and asks if this is true. The woman says he's well informed and hopes Magnus will forgive them for this. The woman says she's sorry she didn't think of it, and the man says she's right. The man apologizes to Magnus and explains that he can explore the ruins as much as he needs, and the woman adds that he can rely on them if any inconvenience arises. The man explains that they aren't as powerful as kings, but they will try to help everyone in their power. Magnus says this won't be a problem, and he himself is like an entire army. Magnus says that next time he'll come here to finally get those very items. He says that the collection of cities from that time, buried in the sand, is called the Ancient Ruins. He explains that this happened because of a great magical ritual that failed 500 years ago, and the released mana caused colossal damage, while simultaneously turning the once flourishing. Magnus explains that the current Aravan kingdom is simply a bunch of guys who remained on top of the old magic kingdom of Aravan, buried in the sand, and they invaded the surrounding countries with the magical items they obtained. He reports that the entire surface of the ruins has already been plundered. The woman reports that, having lost the prestige of the old Aravan kingdom, their conquered territories were reclaimed, and their borders shrank ever further. He explains that even 500 years later, they have become an ordinary small kingdom in the middle of the desert. The woman says, "Ha ha!" The girl asks him to say it again, but a little louder. Magnus, surprised, responds that it's too much. He admits that he loves only Arya. He says that Ramsay's house is somewhere around here. The man yells at the woman to make Ramsay come out. The nun informs him that disobeying the Doomsday Brigade is a serious matter and asks if Magnus knows the consequences. Magnus asks if there are any problems. Bazin and his brigade warn Magnus that he risks facing Bazin himself if he continues. The man says that he says that it is really so. The man uses a red-hot air sword. He tells Fran e Ren el Hel. The man shouts, Bazin-san, laughing. Magnus informs him that this is Fire Magic 4, which can be learned at level 31. He says he's pleased to meet her and identifies himself as a mage. He explains that he came to Karba to seek Ramsay's help in defeating the Demon King and saving the world. The woman says she hasn't seen anything like it in a long time and that it was indeed large. He thanks her for the compliment, and the woman warns him. The nun explains that she can hardly be called a nun since she hasn't been to church in the last 20 years, and says that it's not she who is breaking the rules, but the current clergy. The man asks how they went astray. The nun explains that in any case, it's great. The woman says that in her despair, she was sure she had done something wrong that caused Taigan-sama to abandon her, and she considered leaving the church and quitting being a nun. She explains that although she never missed prayers, after leaving the church, she thought she wouldn't soon. The woman says that Taigan-sama still hasn't taken her magic, and that's rather strange. Magnus explains that it's strange, unless the church guys are lying about hearing God's voice. The woman says it's indeed strange. Magnus says it's strange. The woman laughs and says she likes the guy and should thank him for his help. The man replies that he doesn't like to be indebted and says whatever he wants. The man invites her to eat and not to forget a drink. Magnus explains that he has a plan to defeat the Demon King, and it's his own strategy, which is why he chose Ramsay. He says it's logical that if a person isn't considered important, no one will bother their destination. The man says he's not interested and will leave. He says there are only a couple of places. The man asks if he has any idea where Ramsay Adono might go and says that in any case, he'll be back in less than a month, so it's best to wait and not chase him. The man says he knew about this system from a book and asks if Haidam has similar knowledge. Magnus asks if the man will go with him. The man agrees and offers to personally show Magnus around. The woman says she's also come to see Ramsay and confirms this, and the man says he promises not to drag them back and asks them not to worry. He understands and offers to go together, after which the woman explains that this way they'll finish everything faster and should clean everything up before leaving. He's surprised. Magnus says the wind is so amazing and it's just something. The man says it's all thanks to Naruse Sama Sama. Magnus explains that everyone says that, and the man asks what idiot came up with that name. He says these are village ruins, the 500-year-old remains of the former city of a powerful magical empire. He explains that the defense against external enemies was simply perfect. The old man reports that people of that time imagined living in a giant iron box. Magnus says there's no need to freeze and that they should hurry to get inside. Several young people express surprise and admiration, noticing how much youthful ambition has been gathered in the ruins. 3 young men introduce themselves. One says he's Theo, another says he's Rye, and the third says he's M. He explains that they are triplets and scavengers, a unique profession for Eravana that excavates and explores ancient ruins and distinguishes them from thieves by having a license. He reports that they have been exploring the ruins with a 4th-class pass so far, but Magnus says they're the best when it comes to finding people and thanks them for their help, promising to see them soon. The old man explains that they shouldn't get in the way, calling it rude. The 3 young adventurers say they can handle themselves. They're all experienced adventurers. He tells them they need to be on guard. He explains that Theo and the others are very confident, but he doesn't think they've even reached level 10. He looks ahead. A group of people are walking down the street. Everyone looks up at the flying creatures and objects. He and the others smile. Magnus says it's so bright here, even though there's no sky above them, and asks if this is the first time he's seen a magical object. He explains that the ceiling is glowing. Magnus explains that this magical glow is a magical object and wonders if the entire ceiling is a magical object. He explains that this thing. He says it's not the time for that. The man says they're off to find Ramsadono. In a hidden room in the Tabla ruins, a question is asked about a monster trap. The man explains that it was on the 6th level and it was safe, but he wonders if it's really that dangerous here. He asks. Magnus says that hidden rooms usually have traps. He notes that he didn't expect there to be so many at once. He speaks of stones and casts the spell S-on-no-el, causing the stones to explode. The man orders Gladius to stand at the entrance. The man announces a divine blessing, and Gladius says he will support it with magic. The right panel shows the attack and defense buffs being applied. The top left panel depicts a battle with multiple explosions and blows. In the bottom left, 3 identical guys hug each other, one of them saying it's the first time he's seen such monsters, and the other saying he thought he was going to die. Magnus asks if everything is all right. The man explains that they were warned about traps, but the treasure would be difficult to obtain without help. The man says there appear to be 2 more hidden rooms and suggests checking. Magnus refuses and asks him to stop, but the man insists on finding Ramsay. He says that sharing blessings with others is also a pleasant way of life. He then attacks the jackal-headed creatures with his staff. In response, the creature strikes Magnus. Magnus fights, wielding 2 swords. Magnus, the girl, and the man are smiling, and the robed woman points at Magnus. The robed woman explains something to a group of Magnus, the girl, and the man who are sitting on rocks, while a man with a staff stands nearby. Ramsay's destination is reported to be somewhere on the 8th level of the Tabla ruins, at which point the map becomes useless. He explains that Ramsadono is somewhere on that level and suggests keeping an eye out. The man explains that Ramsay has the ability to hide his tracks, which, of course, the scythe-wielding man announces that other guards will begin to flock to them, and it's hard to miss. Magnus and the 2 women look up and react to the appearance of a scythe-wielding warrior on the roof of the building. The scythe-wielding man summons fire. He says that not only the guards will come here, but also someone else. He explains that, who knows? The 2 guys say that, as expected from Magnus and Klim, they are not afraid of any danger. The man exclaims Ramsay's name. Magnus says, watch out. He says he saved them. 3 young people shout Magnus's name and thank him for saving them. The woman in the robe adjusts her hood. Magnus shouts to Gladius. The horseman turns sharply. Gladius delivers a powerful blow to the enemy. A message appears about the increase in magic resistance with the guardian angel ring. He says the damage was greater than he expected, and that Gladius is standing tall, though he looks like a small soldier. The man from the window orders them to enter the house quickly. He and the others rush inside. The former adventurer Ramsay explains that they came here looking for him, and explains that there are 2 types of guardians, those with permission to damage structures and those without. The girl says they're so lucky, and the boy says he thought he was going to die. The girl asks why the golem stopped chasing him. Magnus announces that it's time for dinner and invites them to join him. He explains that if you spend long enough in the ruins, you'll be able to recognize the guardian at first glance, whether you like it or not, and calls it intuition. He asks how they can tell time without the sun, and he answers, somehow. He then asks Ramsey whose magical objects are in front of him. Ramsey explains that all of these objects were already in the house, and he was able to figure out how to use them. Magnus announces that he plans to explore ancient ruins, and asks if Ramsey would lend his experience and skills. The man thinks he's already retired once, and is wondering how to persuade him. Magnus asks if Ramsey has achieved his goal. The woman reports that Ramsey also lost a comrade here, the seventh and final victim, after which he retired. The man explains that not all legends in this world are true. He says that, as far as he knows, their hero lost 7 friends over 40 years of adventure. The husband, Kane, states that it was 8 years ago and asks what he looks like, turning to Ramsey-san and asking to look at him. The man says the training hasn't been in vain, and the other man says the guy's not bad. Magnus says he'll be Ramsey's successor. The man with the headband explains that he's an incredible guy who can't even drink properly yet, but is already almost like them, and laughs along with the other man who, he says he's never met anyone so talented, and says they continued training, and she could one day become a living legend. The man notices the giant golem and shouts over, ordering them to hurry and run into the building, addressing Ramsey. The guy announces that everyone is here. The man asks if anyone has left. Another man says that this level is beyond their capabilities yet, and suggests they return to the exit. The man shouts that Kane is not there, then another man calls for Kane. The man immediately went to apologize to her family and was ready to accept that. The man says they were so scared and ran that they didn't even take a single thing of hers with them, and he felt so sorry for her, so much so that it's impossible to put into words. Magnus says the man is still here and confirms this. The man explains that's why he retired. He explains that Tabla's problem involves a terrifying monster, a golem, and he understands Ramsey's situation, so he offers to defeat this golem. The man and woman report that it is a monster that even the legendary adventurer has failed to defeat, and ask Magnus if he's joking. Magnus reports that he's already researched the necessary information. The name of the 8th floor boss is Centurion, a golem with an extreme level of magic resistance, the sworn enemy of any mage, created by a once advanced magical civilization. Magnus declares that they intend to win, the boy expresses. He tells them to stop adding dono to his name, and the man confirms this, turning to Sir Climb. Then the man shouts, "Gladius!" The man explains that, as planned in the confined space, the enemy cannot use its strength to destroy structures and cannot turn around. Magnus speaks incomprehensible words, and the man says that God said bless, while there is an increase in strength, agility, resistance, and defense. He says he's using a double attack. On the right side of the stage, there's an attack on 3 opponents with spears. Magnus attacks enemies, creating a powerful whirlwind that knocks them down and destroys their defenses. In response, one enemy attempts a counterattack, but Magnus successfully deflects the blow. He announces that he has paralysis and calls the other man a damn genius. The man prays. Magnus watches as 3 animal-headed warriors create a powerful electrical discharge. The hooded man turns toward them. The animal-headed warrior raises his weapon. Magnus and the hooded man move apart as the electrical discharges continue. He says no wholesaler can do a better job than him. The 2 guys rejoice at their hit and remark on how cool it is to shoot such a small arrow, and one of them announces that they have a chance to win. The man explains that if he deflects his weapon like this during an attack, he simply won't be able to hit them, and he doesn't even have a chance to counterattack. Everything is happening just as he planned. Magnus tells Klim it's time to act. He says that some monk's magic doesn't work until it touches the target and encourages them to go for it. The man says it's Magnus's move. He agrees and says they'll do it. Magnus states that since he was able to deal with Derbenvant, there is no reason for him to lose to the Centurion, and shouts, "Stilt on Noel." He says there's enough for everyone. The man says he's an incredible magician. He says they've truly won. The man says he's very sorry for Kane and that 8 years have passed. The text states that a mourning ceremony is underway for a former comrade. Magnus announces the brilliant return of the great mage, explaining that this is chapter 20. The man with the mustache and cloak rejoices, while 3 men and 1 woman look surprised and frightened. He asks if it's all over now. The man says that he took Kaina's remains to her parents and she was finally buried, something he never thought he'd ever do. The man thanks all the guys. Magnus then speaks. The man says he will accompany them wherever they go, and they will all definitely return alive, and also asks that the ancient ruins be left to him. He announces that they are now friends, and Ramsey replies that it's fine. The man invites the youth to join their adventures. The man explains that he vouches for Magnus's identity. The girl says that the chicken's safe return home depends entirely on Magnus, calling it the legend of returns. The man explains he doesn't want to be picky, but asks if they'll all definitely return alive. The man in black doubts a mage of such caliber. Magnus says that to raise these chicks to be first-class adventurers, you have to be what you are, a legendary adventurer, and expresses a desire to be taken. The man shouts Ramsey's name. Magnus and the man move together. The man tells T. The man says they've simply fallen in love with Magnus and will follow him to hell, and also says Magnus would be happy to teach someone again. He explains that it's a difficult choice for him. The man says he'll try again. He says it's good. The man reports that this Ramsey, nicknamed the Legend of Returns, will certainly bring back all 6 members of their team alive. Magnus says that Ramsey's legend isn't over yet, because now they will create a new legend about how they will all become legendary adventurers. He reports that the search for the items needed to subdue the 8 demonic generals and the Demon King himself has begun, and thanks to the strategy book, they've been searching the target ruins one by one. He lists the rare item Ifrit's Soul and Absolute Air, books on magic. The man says they're having a great time, and that everything is radically different from the days when he was in Evgen's party. He explains that if it weren't for the strategy book, he wouldn't have been able to achieve all this in such a short period of time. A few days later, at Karba's hotel, the guy returns, and the man asks if everything is okay. Magnus reports that, thanks to his supply of rare items, Ari's shop's sales skyrocketed, according to a brilliant plan. Magnus explains that upon returning to Lacoste after a long time, he didn't expect Arya to buy a new house. Arya says she bought it yesterday and wonders, who would have thought? 2 men report that their lord has invited everyone to a meeting. He apologizes for the sudden summons and explains that he usually comes to such occasions himself, but this time he decided to keep a low profile. Magnus says it's nothing serious. The girl thanks him and says she appreciates it. Magnus asks if it's safe here, and the girl explains that it's a store that at least doesn't make a fuss when she comes in, and that all the guests below are his security guards, so they can relax. The woman informs him that the garrison sent from the capital is now based in a large city about 3 kilometers south of here. She asks if he knows a city called Nereus. He says the woman secretly left the capital for him and asks what she wants. Magnus says he heard rumors and explains he learned about it from a strategy book, but it's not true. The woman reports an anomaly occurring in the Kakrala region, south of Nereus. Magnus asks what an anomaly is. The woman explains that towns and villages have simply disappeared. He asks what's wrong with the people, and the girl says they're fine, but they're moving along with them. The traders and adventurers were the first to notice this and immediately reported it to the government. At first, they thought they'd misread the map and gotten lost in the desert. The man reports that later, other people began reporting this, stumbling upon towns and villages not marked on maps. Magnus says this is indeed a problem, explaining that it's a problem for him too, and that if nothing is done, continuing to search the ruins will become simply impossible. One of the magical items he must obtain is located in the area of the ruins of Kakrala, and in this case, the girl offers a deal to Magnus. He says that this is exactly what he was about to offer. The man announces that Princess Farah and her family have been convicted of fraud, meaning she is sentenced to death, and he has come to personally carry out the sentence. In the topmost panel, a man and woman are busy preparing and serving food in a restaurant. Magnus informs them that they are obliged to protect her dignity. A woman with 2 daggers warns Ramsey that he'd better give them his power, otherwise they'll take it by force, and reveals that she's from the National Corps. The woman asks what Titan is doing here, and he answers Brown with the same question. The woman says rumors have spread that Ramsey is hiding in this store, and she rushed over. The man explains that he finally has the opportunity to eliminate the princess, which is why he came here. The man suggests they finally get down to business. The man and the woman say they must return to the chapter with. Magnus says they'll clear the way and leave the princess to others. The man warns not to get carried away, and the guy shouts, "Hey!" He tells them they've been through a lot, and confirms they're not the same anymore. He then yells for them to wait and points out the enemy levels. Magnus says he can't leave the princess alone. A boy invites his brother to play with them and suggests they try their best, but another boy says it's not nice to cheat. The woman says she's not worried and will deal with the opponents who will get what they want, but the man says he has no time for these fools. Then the woman, wielding 2 daggers, engages several opponents. The woman laughs and says it suits the boys, but they're not her type at all. Magnus screams in shock. The man explains that the woman decided not to kill them but only to mock them, and uses that perhaps their low level is of some use. The man says they still have time to discuss it, but it's still pointless. He asks if he thinks he'll let them just sit there and watch what's going on downstairs. He explains that if he goes all out and attacks, there'll be nothing left of the store. The woman. Magnus says there's nothing surprising about the reaction of those around him to a mage in the vanguard. The man asks if Magnus enjoys being cannon fodder. He says there's no point in expecting mercy and calls the other man an idiot. He strikes, which the other man tries to avoid, but expresses surprise and considers it absurd to dodge his scabbard. A message appears about Magnus's increased agility thanks to the Mantle of Winds. Magnus says he thinks he never imagined, even in his dreams, that he'd ever see a level 36 mage in front of him, and that it's as rare as encountering a monster in the heart of the city. Magnus asks if the other man is supposed to be around level 20, to which he replies that he is. He says, and the masked man also says, He says that the Mantle of Winds has a special effect, creating enemies out of mirages. Magnus says he called him an idiot and said there would be no mercy. He explains that he doesn't even need magic, as it's just a difference in levels and statuses and will bring him an easy victory. The old woman and the girl look on with concern. He exhales. The man laughs and asks where they're going, then says they had a lot of competence but still lacked dexterity. The man turns around abruptly. The woman calls Brown. The man warns her not to move. The man makes a stomping sound. The woman apologizes for dragging Magnus into this mess and says she lacks the words to properly thank him for his help. Magnus explains that there's no need to worry about it, as the intruders endangered his ally's life, so it's mutual. The man orders. The woman says she understands why they were hunting her, but wonders why they need Sir Ramsay. The man explains that the National Defense Corps is planning to explore ancient ruins, so they need someone with experience in such matters. He explains that there are 100 reasons why someone would want a legend. The woman says there's no need for thanks. She wanted to express her gratitude not only with words, but also with something useful. The man asks if it's a key. The woman explains it's the key to her room in the Imperial Palace. The man replies that he's returning it. Magnus says, The girl explains that she meant Magnus would be able to enter her chambers without any problem, and she didn't mean anything like that. She says she's letting him into her bed and asks him not to make such a face. Magnus says he's not making any plans and it doesn't matter to him. The disappearance of villages and towns in the Kakrali region is currently being investigated. He reports that they are accompanying the legion that is dealing with the matter. Magnus explains that although the imperial family owns 4 such flying carpets, this is the first time he's seen one of this size. Magnus apologizes and explains that it's simply not every day he gets the chance to leave the palace, so he'll be more careful. The man asks if Magnus is sure that. The woman tells him to relax and enjoy the ride. He says he likes the way they look at life. Magnus says he thought nuns were all stuffy and stubborn, and that it's time to reconsider his views on that matter. The man says he also always thought princesses were just silly, incompetent girls, but he's taken a liking to them. The man asks Magnus where the settlements have disappeared to. He explains that a giant sandworm is to blame. The girl says she's heard of them. He explains that they're huge creatures that eat everything indiscriminately and are real monsters, but they usually can't swallow. The woman says things could get very dangerous going forward, and advises Magnus to retreat with the soldiers. Magnus says that's what he'll do. The man explains that he doesn't want to sacrifice people. The woman believes it won't be difficult to swallow the enemy cavalry. Magnus says they need to show that the army is capable. General Tahar says he can't be fooled. The man warns Princess Farah not to listen to Magnus because he can't be trusted, and Farah says he's very caring and can be relied upon. The woman informs General Tahar that Magnus is not a passerby, but a hero who has saved the kingdom more than once, and expresses regret that he, being of royal blood, is defending such a man. The man calls Magnus a fictitious hero and accuses him of making up tall tales, and the general says that to defeat the enemy, loyalty and courage are needed, not a plan of action, and that under his command, 3,000 spears will valiantly defeat any enemy at once. He explains that they have only one enemy, the sandworm, and suggests working together, but the man says he's never even seen Magnus in combat. The girl says it's rude, and the guy asks what he's talking about. The man on the camel points forward. The woman apologizes for the general's words. Magnus tells her to ignore the incident as it is not worth it, and says that the soldiers will most likely die. The woman explains that while an army obeys a general, and the general serves the princess, an army of the best warriors obeys only their general, so her orders are null and void. The girl explains that while she is formally superior to the general, she can only command her own guards. The man asks if the girl can. The upper right corner tells us that in Farah's past, her father merely accepted gifts for matchmakers, but never made a decision. The upper left corner tells us that potential suitors anointed him as best they could, but left empty-handed. Basically, nothing good. In the center right corner is a man in armor. Magnus explains that it's not a matter of kindness, but simply that they don't need unnecessary sacrifices, and that people's lives are no joke. Magnus says that if they have something to say, let them say it, and asks them not to look at him that way. The woman and the older woman watch silently. He reports that it's a mirage, as he suspected. The man asks if he can overheat in the sun. The guy asks what's going on, are the mountains moving or something? The man shouts, Worm Emperor? The man reports that the swindler was right. Then he orders the formation to be built and all units to attack. The knight tells Princess Farah to remain behind, promising to protect her. Princess Farah tells her to obey the royal command and to retreat immediately in case of mortal danger. The knights on horseback rush forward. A figure closer to the princess and her companions is visible on the carpet. The man says it's too late and sighs. He then says they need to run and stop the humans from defeating the enemy, calling for everyone to quickly leave, retreat, and pull back. A powerful explosion erupts on stage, sending people and animals flying in all directions. The man orders the princess's orders to be obeyed. The man declares that he is the great Tahar, a brave general of the Alaband army. The man says that this will not happen. A level 37 Worm Emperor says he can't lose to the worm and that it's just a bad dream. A man says that last time the worm attacked suddenly and won, but now it's a different story, and offers to show what human strength and ingenuity are. Another man says someone will have to shake things up. Magnus tells them to knock down the paws first, then confirms he understands. Below is the extraction of ancient relics called ice arrows. He speaks to Flan Reneziel. He reports that the ancient relics are working perfectly and that there are still so many of them. Magnus says it's not that easy to hit an enemy in the air. The man says there are still plenty of arrows and suggests they keep shooting. The woman says that's excellent and they should keep it up, and the man confirms that's exactly right. He says it's the Ramsey Pyramid. Our overgrown worm wasn't particularly picky about food, so it's lucky that out of nowhere there's an ancient pyramid, and they still don't have a pass. The man explains that it's quite a trophy. The woman says she can give him away earlier. Magnus tells her that means they're going to the pyramid. He says there are no dangers on the first level, and they can relax, and the man asks where he's so sure. He explains that last time they swept away all the guards here, and the man says it's a real treasure hunter. The man explains that this place is home to slaves who work for the palace and are not allowed to leave its grounds. The man explains that slaves cannot resist and must obey all orders. The man explains that the palace is guarded by warriors who prevent the slaves from escaping. Magnus reports that there are living people here and explains that they are people from villages and towns eaten by the Worm Emperor. He explains that they apparently found the pyramid in its stomach and managed to hide here. The man says, no, that's it. The boy asks if they are descendants. The woman says they didn't know how to get out and their supplies were running low, and thanks them for their help. The man says he doesn't know how to thank them. He explains that an army of soldiers led by Princess Farah will help them outside and answers their question about the possibility of escaping. The robot asks what his orders are. Magnus explains that the staircase is inside the building and that he is one of the few who has climbed deep into the pyramid. The boy asks what the robot is, and the man explains that it is a servant created through magic, destined to live here for centuries. He explains that the guards protected the city and the servants helped the people, and adds that a servant cannot do anything without a human order, although this is still strange. He asks what the orders will be. Magnus says he needs to go to the center of the pyramid and asks if he can take him there. The robot replies that he's afraid he's not allowed to fulfill such requests. The old man laughs and says that Magnus really is a smart guy. The robot explains that since he's quite smart, he decided to. He says he'll definitely see you soon. A group of people, including Magnus, descend the stairs, followed by a robot. The ant asks if his name is Mr. Magnus and says he's awaiting orders. Magnus says he's awaiting orders and turns to Klim, saying it's because of him that the ant learned his name. The man explains to Magnus that the ant won't leave him alone and advises him to keep him occupied. He says he'll really go with them and asks if he's serious. The insect asks if the creations of other magicians can be trusted. Magnus announces that they've all set out, fighting off guards along the way. A man explains something, pointing upward, with Magnus standing next to him. The man smiles. The robot listens. A fight with 2 guards is taking place in the background. The top right text states that they are solving puzzles. From right to left in the top left panel, a man explains that they must solve a puzzle, and a guy with a scythe states that it's difficult. A man with a mustache smiles and says something, raising his hand. At the top right, it's stated that this is the heart of the Ramsey Pyramid. At the bottom right, a group of people stand in front of a huge door, behind which a shadow with an axe is visible. Magnus thanks Ramsey for his help and reports that, thanks to her, they reached the center of the pyramid without any problems. Ramsey says he was glad to help. He explains that last time they were unable to obtain the high priest's key. He says that everything will work out now, but the man says that the task is not so simple. The man says they turn back under the onslaught of Godzu. The man explains that Godzu is the pyramid's most powerful guardian. The man warns Magnus to beware of Godzu. Magnus says he knows this, and he also knows that Godzu is made of mithril, the most powerful. He says that this is a container for a magical creature called the magic vessel. Magnus explains the plan. Only he and Gladius will enter the hall. Any intrusion by Godzu will be considered hostile, and the entrance will be immediately sealed with a magical barrier. The boy asks if Godzu kills everyone who crosses the threshold, and says that he doesn't. It reports increased strength, energy, agility, speed, increased defense, and protection from magical elements. The man casts a spell. Magnus stares ahead with concentration. 3 young men wish Magnus luck in battle, believe in his victory, and urge him onward. He explains that he will not leave his creator. The man reports that the enemy's axe is made of adamantium, and even with a strengthening spell, it can't be pierced. Magnus explains that the enemy won't give up without a fight, and yet he acts anyway. He says that you need to defeat him to get the key, and urges you to go only forward. Magnus announces that he will first create interference by weakening the enemy's attack, and cast the spell Stilton Well. He states that he uses a reflective shield and a scattering barrage to reflect the enemy's fire attacks. He attacks by striking with his weapon. Magnus reports that he's repelled the fire attack, and that Klim's defensive spells are nearly at their limit, but he's still in good shape. Magnus attacks with a stone strike and calls Gladius into battle. The monk says, "I implore you, Lord, in your mercy grant healing." He watches intently as the scene unfolds. The man explains that the monastic magic is at work, and that this barrier is insurmountable for ordinary wizards. He explains that the civilization that created him, despite its advancement. Magnus reports that Gladius is protected from magic, and that it has little effect on him, and that Klim's spells work on the same principle. The man says he can heal any wound and hopes Magnus's courage won't be required for the treatment. He tells him not to worry, that the enemy will sooner run out of strength than surrender in battle, and the man calls him insolent. The man says he will be on guard and orders them to fight without fear, after which he begins to move forward. Magnus strikes the enemy using Stone 4. He announces that Klim will heal him no matter how badly he's been hit, and with the support of his comrades, victory is inevitable. Several people watch the proceedings. A man says the battle is dragging on and asks how many attacks Dev has already made. He breathes heavily, then announces that the enemy's forces are exhausted and that they have strategized their defenses well. He orders another strike and calls the fighting style Siddleton El Hay. The next scene shows the destruction of Stone 4. Magnus says that he will now aim for the cracks and not miss his chance, then shouts that he will now strike twice. He casts a spell to enhance his strength. He raises his weapon and delivers a powerful blow. The armored man tries to defend himself, gripping the weapon's hilt. Magnus explains that to defeat a golem made of magical metal, you simply need an even stronger metal. He delivers a powerful blow that destroys the enemy's armor, and then watches the destruction with a smile. The little creature tells Magnus that he fought magnificently, simply marvelously and uniquely. Magnus replies that he did well. The old man tells Magnus that today he has accomplished what he himself was unable to do, to which Magnus agrees. He tells everyone to remain still. Salma explains that they don't want to harm anyone. Nadia explains that they only need the high priest's key and asks for it, promising that then they will leave. Salma urges them to think clearly. The man asks how they got here. The woman explains that ever since Titan attacked, they've been watching them through an all-seeing orb. Magnus explains that the biggest problem is behind their backs. The text explains that the crown prince, driven by his ideals, won't be afraid of the deputy. He tells Cupcake not to move. The woman says that the key contains enormous power and shouts at Magnus, while the other woman is outraged that the old woman is allowing herself to do such a thing. Magnus says he'll give up the key if they let Klim go. The woman says they admire Magnus's prudence and wisdom and explains that it's your choice, wizard. Magnus says he has no intention of sacrificing Klim's life, but has no doubt about his self-will. He says he swore never to act against his conscience and doesn't throw words to the wind. The man asks if he's really that naive. He says, "Take the key since you need it so much." Several people walk toward each other. Magnus reports that the guardian ants don't attack people. Magnus says it's impossible they attacked without orders. Magnus reports that Cupcake is attacking. He says that Cupcake can even act without orders. Cupcake is happy that Klim is free. The girl reports that she's conducting an assessment and eliminating the obstacle. The girl shouts, "Cupcake." The man says he's pursuing an enemy. Magnus says he won't allow it. The man explains he's canceling and dodging the attack. He says he shouldn't have gotten into trouble, but the robot says he was useful to them. He explains not to do it again. The woman talks about the master's happiness and care, and Magnus says she's starting to irritate him. Magnus explains that if the ants destroyed something, he'd lose his temper. He says they've only just met, but he's already taken a liking to him and admits it. The nun says you won't get any praise from the grumpy Magnus, and then praises Cupcake. The man reports increased strength, enhanced defense, and increased durability. The woman reports increased protection against magic and increased agility. The girl announces the complete destruction of her opponent and strikes Magnus, who attempts to dodge. The girl continues to attack, and Magnus deflects the blow with his hand. The girl strikes the man in the face. He asks what it is. The man says it's a core fighter, and the other man notes that it has great strength. He explains that it's a golem, a creature animated by ancient magic. He explains that the golem is no stronger than Godzu. The man says they need to come up with something. Magnus reacts with surprise to the sudden impact, followed by paralysis and blindness. The man explains that he won't be able to heal anymore, and Magnus says it's a very powerful spell. He says that he will repay in kind, and at the same time uses strong poison 2, paralysis 2, blindness 2, and binding 2. The girl experiences poisoning, paralysis, loss of strength, and immobilization. The woman explains that metal golems are immune to such magic, unlike flesh and blood bodies. Magnus says such spells don't require much energy, and he can continue using them all day. The woman says they're looking for a golem. The girl explains she can't because her magic isn't working. A man with a sword looks down at a fallen girl lying on the ground. Magnus smiles. A message appears stating that the girl is a battle trophy, a golem made. Two masked women look on in surprise. One of the women says they should surrender. The man says goodbye. He notices a running man approaching and expresses surprise. Magnus calls for them to stop, explaining that it's Gomez, the sliding shadow, and wonders how Ramsey didn't notice him. The text says it's the National Defense Corps, Gomez, the sliding shadow. The man reports that the thief is able to sneak into tombs to loot them. He shouts a spell, binding the enemy. The man says, "Damn." Magnus and the man touch objects at the same time. Magnus and the man create a portal called Airgate and immediately run into it. The woman says he's a fool. He says the high priest's key is a precious stone and laughs. Then a portal appears. The man tells Magnus that he deliberately gave the key to the thief and says he shouldn't have chased after the thief. Magnus explains that he doesn't understand where the man got such thoughts from. He says that although he could have stopped him with magic, he explains that he could have easily pushed everything on the stand off it. The man says that this is suspicious. The man says he doesn't understand the point of this show. Magnus says Ramsey won't fool him. He says that when they captured Clem, he thought about it and decided it would be better to give them the key since circumstances had changed and he had changed his plans. He explains that instead of the key, he decided to take the sea stone bracelet. The man and the girl are surprised. He explains that otherwise, Clem would have stayed. The caption states that the action takes place in Barzef's workshop. Barzef laughs and says they've been through quite a bit. The text next to the robot describes the aftermath of a desperate battle. The man says he'll take it if they ask. Magnus says he needs to make more weapons and asks what's up with the mithril. The man replies, It's reported that the ant needs fixing. Arya from the Alm Company explains who she is. The action is reported to take place in a restaurant in Lacusta. The woman says they have little experience in foreign trade. The man explains that they want to supply products to Alabanu, where agriculture is less developed. The man explains that Alabanu's economy is weakening, and they are increasingly dependent on their neighbors. The man says they will find favorable terms. The man says they're ready to work right now. Nimus explains that he'll then be responsible for trade in Alabama. The woman says she may be considered too young, but she will work hard. The men say the woman was recommended to them by Master An, and they trust him, noting that it was Master An who saved everyone from the Worm Emperor and is their liberator. He says. Magnus informs her that their contracts won't bring any benefits and asks if that's a shame. The girl says she's the only one working today, but the more Alm prospers, the more people turn to her for services. Magnus explains that's true, and then he'll work even harder. The woman announces that the day is already over. The man addresses the woman as his dear daughter and says that she has successfully completed the assigned task. The text announces that an audience is taking place at the palace. Magnus thanks his dear father for his invaluable lessons and guidance and asks him not to deprive his friend of his favor. The man confirms this, laughing and agreeing. Magnus explains that he promised his friend a special, sealed permit if he would obtain rare artifacts. He says he's already forgotten how he was thrown into prison. The girl explains that Farah must be secretly rescuing people, otherwise the prison would be bursting at the seams by now. The man announces that he's giving Magnus something. Magnus asks him to wait, Your Majesty. The man explains that issuing permission to suspicious strangers is dangerous, and it's unknown what shady business it might be used for. At the bottom right, it's reported that Murad has proposed to Farah. The man addresses the man seated on the throne and informs him that the marketplace magician has already managed to gain the princess's trust, calling him a rogue and a scoundrel. He asks if His Majesty has heard of this. The girl says he is trustworthy and confirms this personally. Magnus reports that the soldiers told him everything and explains that this charlatan and Princess Farah have long been in cahoots. The girl says this is nonsense. He tells his father not to believe idle gossip. He explains that a soldier is a man of honor and will never stoop to gossip, and he trusts a soldier's word as his own. The old man says Murad has never let him down. The man says Murad is a real sycophant and uses slander to eliminate rivals. The old man explains that the magician seems suspicious to him and never gave him any permission. The girl listens. Magnus reports that the soldiers have no reason to spread rumors and confirms Murad's loyalty. The man explains that with such a narrow-minded ruler, Albany will soon be finished, and it could be better for him to handle it himself. Magnus says there's no need to rush. The woman refuses permission and says, Two soldiers report a mutiny and a large number of soldiers advancing. A bearded man asks what a mutiny means. He smiles. The girl panics. The man with the necklace and two men behind him look alarmed. The man says that almost all the soldiers are participating in the mutiny and asks who is the ringleader, expressing bewilderment at what they are planning to do. The woman reports that Crown Prince Hydal is leading the rebellion. The man and the old man with the beard express surprise. The woman asks why her brother would rebel, considering he's already the heir to the throne. Magnus says it's extremely dangerous to stay here and asks what we should do. The man listens. The man says, He demands the rebels be punished and declares that His Majesty will not die. He shouts that he will not take the Avenger's head. The boy says his stomach is churning and his heart aches, and he calls out the name Marat. Marat asks for forgiveness. The man says that since he is the ruler, he shouldn't expect mercy from the rebels. Magnus explains that this is a very high probability. The man asks if this means that if he is no longer the ruler, Haida will have no regard for him. Man announces he is abdicating the throne. Magnus announces that he will give the seal ring to Farah. The man explains that the throne is now hers, and it's up to her to decide what to do with Hydal. The girl listens. The men in the background are surprised. He says that he congratulates the girl and calls her the new ruler. The woman tells them to take the former ruler to a safe place in the Western Tower. Magnus reports that there's a prison for nobles there and orders that his father be held there for the rest of his life. The man shouts at Farah to stop and says she's wrong to warn him of the imminent arrival of rebels. Farah explains that this is her first order and demands that she act quickly. He orders the execution of the traitor Hydal and asks that those who have objections speak up. The men respond that they have no objections and swear allegiance. The woman says she'll be fine. The woman explains she's not worried, Your Majesty, and Magnus says he's on your side. He says that in return he will someday ask for a favor that only a ruler can provide. The girl says that she will try to be useful to him, and he calls this promising. A man and a woman approach a group of people at the entrance to a building. The man, with a serious expression, walks forward, followed by the woman and security. The man says that the man probably understands what he's trying to say and calls him sister. The woman touches the necklace around her neck. The woman asks Hydal why she's rebelling and whether it's all about power. Hydal explains that her father's reign was leading the country to inevitable ruin, so it was necessary to remove the fool from the throne as quickly as possible. The man explains that he was assigned all the dirty work and asks how this could happen, even though he himself wanted to take the throne. Magnus explains that he understands that Prince Hydal likely wanted to save his country, but a different method should have been chosen. The girl says he carefully chooses dirty methods and suggests that someone else should do this job, asking if he meant to insult her with such advice. He says he doesn't care at all how and why war is started. The man asks what he wants to say, and he explains. A man reports that the wizard is saying strange things. Another man says he thinks everyone has heard of the demonic eight and explains that when they want to enslave a country, they first turn to the local nobility, tricking people into selling their souls. Magnus reports that Prince Hydal has been singled out as a traitor among the Alabama residents. The soldiers demand that anyone who speaks up accuse the prince, and one of them explains that Prince Hydal only wants to restore Alabama to its former glory and power. Another soldier shouts, "How can anyone accuse?" He reports that ancient Alabama was simultaneously wiped off the face of the earth and turned into a lifeless desert due to a failed magical ritual, the purpose of which was to summon only the magical power of the Lord of Darkness. He explains that although the summoning was successful, the people were unable to. Magnus reveals that, having gained this power, he intended to make Alabama even more powerful and take the throne. He says he knows everything about Heidal and asks them to forgive him, then explains that if you turn a blind eye to all the troubles, then what they have achieved is worth a lot. He says that this is why he allowed them to take the key from Ramses' pyramid, otherwise a rebellion would have started. Heidal. Magnus reports that the prince is indeed talented, but if he were in his interlocutor's shoes, he would choose his means more carefully and even allow him to ascend the throne, as it would be a great loss. Magnus adds that the interlocutor is closely connected to the cursed Storm General and has formally sold his soul. He says he killed the cursed Storm General Jamutan, using the stolen power to become Heidal Jamutan. The man says he's clearly accomplished a lot, but it's hardly a feat. The man asks how he knew. Magnus delivers a powerful blow that causes the man and the girl to step back, the man expressing surprise. He says that the red-blue paradise gem weakens the cursed Storm General's power and is capable of revealing his true form. He tells him to stop this. The cursed Storm General makes a sound of pain. Magnus reports that his attack breaks through the enemy's defense and deals a powerful blow. The men watch in horror as he and the girl are caught in a powerful explosion. The girl says her brother doesn't understand why he's doing this. Two people call upon Highness Haydn. The man with the saber laughs and falls to the ground. Magnus admits defeat and declares that he has lost today, and the woman calls Magnus the one who defeated the Dark Lord. He says that the final battle will be his. The man with the staff replies that he will remember this. The man reports that the guardsmen who participated in the uprising have been placed in indefinite custody. The man explains that upon seeing Heidal's true form, the rebels lost all fighting spirit. The man explains that the country is currently being guarded by the Emperor's trusted men. The woman apologizes for the delay and hands over a search warrant for the palace vault. Magnus says he came for the warrant the next time he visited the palace, and everything went according to plan, adding that it will encourage her to become empress. The woman tells Magnus that she's leaving her brother in his care. He informs her that a decisive battle is inevitable. The man explains that the remaining key was in the Pyramid of Maurice and that it only took a day to capture it. The text also mentions the key to the underground palace, the soul of Marcida, and the woman reports that the guard of the Dawn Roof Pyramid reported that her brother had taken something from there. She then says that there is no more time to waste, and they have rushed to awaken the underground palace. The man explains that the underground palace is uncharted territory, and besides, they must advance. Magnus tells them to go forward. The man explains that this is an underground palace, it's simply gigantic and completely unlike the other ruins they've been to, and asks why it's in such disrepair. He explains that the underground palace was the epicenter of a failed magical ritual, so it's no surprise that everything here is destroyed. The guy explains that Heidal most likely destroyed all the guards. The woman asks if everything is too destroyed and if the battle was that fierce. The man reports that there are too many guards and traps. The man asks if they are lost. Magnus says everything is fine. He says there's an interesting magical object here that he wants to take. He tells him that this is it. The text explains that this is the office of the crown prince of an ancient magical empire. Magnus says, shh. Magnus looks tense. The man says he's surprised by the visitors and welcomes them into his office. He says it's an ancient spirit. The man says that if you imagine it as a monster, it's at least level 30, and explains that it's an incorporeal spirit, the product of necromancy. The woman says ghosts aren't that cute. The guy panics and asks if it's a ghost. The woman reports that Prince Medet died during a magical ritual and was unable to be reborn as a spirit. Magnus explains that the woman has an interesting item with a divine seal. He asks if he wants to try it. The woman refuses and says that if he even touches her with his finger, he will go to heaven, and also tells him that there is another interesting thing here for which he came. He explains that he cannot back down until he gets this item, but at the same time, Magnus shouts for them to stop and asks who this man is. Spectre explains that he didn't intend to guard the item too closely and offers to take it, then says they can call him Spectre and says they'll meet again. The man orders them to run to the end of the corridor. Several men warn Holmes it's a trap, but he insists he must choose, either run and die, or he will finish Holmes here. Holmes tries to object, but the man threatens him with a knife to his throat. The man says that if they make it out alive, they'll receive a reward from the boss, and asks them to be grateful for his kindness. The guy yells for them to go. Several men run. The masked man is stricken and bloodied. Magnus informs Nadia. Then the masked man smashes something with a powerful blow. The man reports that he can now walk safely, watching a group of people walking along the destroyed road. Magnus says the job was done well. The woman explains that, aside from his two assistants, the rest are just rabble who only thought about becoming famous. The man explains that, like that spoiled emperor trying to profit from his beloved country, one has to fight fire with fire when one wants to contribute to the country's development. The boy reports that they made it safely and is happy. The woman says that Magnus doesn't seem to have gotten ahead of them. The boy orders Holmes to go ahead. Holmes asks to wait, and if he'll be used as live bait, the boy asks what he said. He says that if you survive, you will receive a reward and should be grateful for his kindness. The man with the sword screams, "Damn it," and attacks. He calls him "Damn it," and the man accuses him of betrayal and calls him a snake. The man tries to run away but hears orders to leave. A boy falls among crumbling, sharp stone blocks. The text block reads, "Copycat." A man screams as a powerful explosion occurs and shrapnel flies. Magnus stands calmly, and behind him are two masked girls. The woman explains that although they had 100 golems, their capabilities are now insufficient. The man explains that most of them were lost in a battle with Jamutan, and another one died in the final battle. The woman explains that thanks to this, Jamutan was defeated, and Mr. Hay, Magnus says that revolution has always required sacrifices, which was true then and now. He tells him to continue his journey into the future. He steps on the ground, causing the wall to collapse and revealing a passage behind which a human figure is visible. The man says that returning Alabama to its former power was his most cherished wish. He loves the people of Alabama. The man reports that the previous king turned out to be an impenetrable idiot. He explains that to overcome this, he turned to Jamutan, pretended to be swayed by his sweet words, and killed him first. The man explains that he gained new power and became a demon. Magnus reveals that he renounced his human form without hesitation, as he could now wage war without endangering the country's inhabitants. He explains that, just like the Great Eight Demons, he could have lived another 1,000 years and become the greatest ruler of Alabama in. He says that, when he imagines their proud faces, his human heart is filled with warmth. The bottom panel depicts a group of people standing in front of a ruined gate. The man announces that he commands the trespassers to be destroyed in the name of the seal. Magnus says he will also use the seal and orders them to abandon the battlefield. The man with long blonde hair looks surprised, and the girl has a close-up of her eye. The woman says that two simultaneous and conflicting orders will trigger a standby mode. He explains that as long as the battle maids are here, victory will be impossible. A man with long blonde hair asks why Magnus also has a seal. Magnus says the enemy will pay for their insolence. The text reveals that they are facing a level 42 Heidel Jamutan. He says he admires how the enemy's aura is still as terrifying as ever, despite being weakened by the Paradise Gem. Then the dragon shouts that he will crush them into dust and rushes into the vortex. Magnus says eternal wind and explains that the magical item is the eternal wind, which absorbs all wind damage until it reaches its capacity. The dragon says that he will then defeat them with lightning. Magnus says eternal sands. The dragon is surprised and asks what? The dragon strikes, causing paralysis. He reports that the poison is incredibly strong and even affected the golem, which has absolute resistance. Magnus says he can't give in either. The woman says she's not recovering fast enough and that at this rate they won't be of much use, but she urges them not to lose heart and that while they're alive, they'll be useful in some way. The dragon asks Magnus to answer him. Magnus shouts something in an unknown voice. He says it's a secret and he can't answer. The dragon calls Magnus a brat and asks how long he's been preparing for this. The dragon then explains that Magnus has been creeping him out from the start and that he's worthy of admiration. He confirms. The girl says she doesn't understand the meaning of these words, and the man thanks Nadia and Celine for serving him all this time. Magnus warns them not to absorb the demon lord's power or try to level up, otherwise their minds will darken and they will become a true monster, the man declares. A woman and a man scream in terror as a huge dragon appears, roaring and advancing. The man asks the woman what's going on, and the woman addresses someone as Highness. Magnus tells him to turn on his brain and explains that he has completely lost his mind, and at this rate he will destroy everyone he wanted to save, and there is no other way to save him, and asks if they will allow this to happen. A woman asks for forgiveness from His Highness. A man clutches a staff. Magnus informs that Fran and Ren LC Tirth on Newer. He then explains that the left hand uses the heavy attunement Fire 4, and the right hand uses the heavy attunement Storm 4. It attacks with a fiery blast, creating a powerful wave of fire. The sound of cracking ice accompanies the appearance of the ice dragon. Magnus announces the spell's name, Confluence, Lava Flow. Magnus casts the spell, creating a powerful vortex of lava. He screams, letting out a loud cry. Magnus explains that to achieve a great goal, great power is needed, and this is true. He explains that, however, drowning in power can lead to loss of self, and Heidal reminded him of this. Magnus explains that at the very beginning of the Book of the World, it is said that truths are hidden here, and how to use. He reports that he has received Heidal Jamatan's items, including the Storm General's boots and the Thunderwatch Paradise Stone, and that he has also leveled up to 38. Another part of the scene shows him defeating Heidal. Magnus reports that a human cannot bear even a fraction of the Demon Lord's power. He says that in the name of the seal, he orders that no one be allowed to approach this place. The girl and the woman listen. The upper right text indicates that this is the royal garden of Alabama. Magnus says that they have indeed decided to combine the coronation ceremony with the victory celebration. He says he's not used to this kind of ceremony and asks her to forgive him, and the girl says she knows because it's not the first time. He explains that everyone is having a lot of fun, and the girl thanks Arya for agreeing to accompany him. The girl says this will help strengthen the Marm Guild's trade relations with Alabama, and also says that while that's fine, at least she'll be able to remember her face here. Magnus explains that he'll find out what Arya says and adds that merchants never miss a chance. Dev. Arya informs him that she's a close friend of Magnus, a merchant of Lacusta and the daughter of Marm. She congratulates Your Highness Farah on your coronation. Arya tells Magnus that she is very proud of what he has accomplished and wants to reward him properly. He explains that he is merely a traveler. Magnus says he'll ask the question differently then. The woman asks if Magnus would like to become the new Empress's husband. The man and the woman are surprised. The crowd announces that Empress Farah has proposed and that the celebration will turn into a wedding ceremony, congratulating him on this. He explains that he shouldn't joke like that because people believed him. Magnus says he's honestly envious of the girl. The girl says she truly believed it and was surprised. She explains that she too wanted to be Magnus's close friend. Then the girl thanks him for the kind words and is confident that Magnus will also find a close friend one day. The woman says she'll return to the serious conversation. He says he's giving her the title of Demon Lord Subjugator, just like in Lacusta. The man thinks a close friend can't be just one. The woman says she adores this side. The men say their homeland will truly be transformed now, and that no words are enough to express their gratitude. Magnus says he should thank them. The men thank him for everything. He says, "Come back with pride." The three guys answer, "Yes." He explains, "Be sure to stop by sometime. They'll give you the best welcome." They say goodbye until they see you again. Magnus tells him to stop, explains that this isn't his style, and suggests a little patience. The man explains that the government has recently changed and there's still something to worry about, and also explains that the princess begged him so hard that he couldn't refuse. The girl says that it's not her job and that now, he says that when you serve the empress, your clothes must be appropriate. The woman explains that's why she has to wear this outfit. He asks what about the old man? The man explains that the old man also serves the princess, and a spy can't wear flashy clothes. The man and woman say Magnus is truly selfish, to which the man confirms this. The man explains that he is kind and can't refuse someone in trouble. Magnus says that when the time comes, don't be shy about asking. Magnus asks the woman how things are going with the other two. He says that Nadia's spatial gate skill should be popular, and the girl agrees that it's a very handy skill. He explains that after Heidal's defeat, he persuaded two girls to go with them, and they were accepted into the Marm Merchant Guild, although Farah wasn't particularly interested either. The man reports that on one side is the foolish Tenzin, who encouraged his subordinates to sell their souls to demons. The man explains that on the other side is Heidal, who himself turned into a true demon. Magnus says their next plan is to increase their influence in Kaju, and the girl explains that then they will have access to the royal sea route. The girl explains that the Marm Merchant Guild has agreed to help them raise the necessary sum, as preparations have already been completed. Magnus says that in order to defeat one of the demon, he thanks her and says he could never have done it alone. The text explains that the archipelago consists of 9 islands in the open sea, each independent, but together they form a single trade federation. It also states that this is the country of Keiju. The woman informs Magnus that he must now visit all 9 islands and explains that she will accompany him. Magnus expresses surprise and says that he himself said he couldn't do it alone, after which he agrees. He asks Basilf to explain and asks how this happened, how his steel ant turned into this. Basilf reports that this is a shocking transformation. The girl reports that Chocula is now even stronger and commands whatever she wants. She explains that his fighting ability and attractiveness have increased significantly. Magnus listens. The woman reports that the salty wind feels pleasant at first. The girl explains that the wind has tousled her hair and now it won't want to stroke her. The man remains silent. The text states that they are on their way to Kaja. A girl suggests they be kinder to each other, and another girl says he's making a mountain out of a molehill. She explains that she's trying to act like a girl and asks if he likes it. The girl asks where the mouth is, that says he shouldn't, and touches the other girl's face. Magnus says he doesn't like it. The girl says they'll be inseparable, and he says it's like long-standing trading partners. He explains that Arya really taught him a lot. Magnus reports that before his death, the king of the southern pirates distributed the islands among his 9 sons, each of whom runs a large trading company, the ownership of which is passed down through generations to this day. The girl asks if all 9 islands together form a single federation, and Magnus confirms this. The girl points to the land and says it's Nelf Island. The man explains that they arrived earlier than expected, and everything is as the captain said. A seasoned sea dog is immediately apparent. He explains that he always does his job perfectly, and after all, the Marm Guild pays him well. Magnus says that a small ship is being pursued and asks if the pursuers are the Azuri Guild. He informs that the Azuri Trade Guild is one of the target guilds for cooperation, and he would not like to get into trouble by mistake. He explains that in a normal situation, those who violated the agreement and decided not to pay money are prosecuted, but now the situation is not very similar to usual. Magnus asks if they can wedge themselves in and approach the small boat side by side. The bearded man says they'll certainly do their best. Magnus explains that if they are intruders, it would be a fine greeting for Azuri. The man with the sword says that the right decision is to surrender, and it's a shame they'll have to slaughter everyone anyway. The other man says that after that, they'll have fun with the women until they get tired of it. Magnus delivers a powerful sword blow to his opponent. Several men run after the action. One of them falls into the water. He says he's now level 38 and won't even need magic to defeat such a rabble. The men look scared and tense. Magnus yells, "Kaya." The girl asks him to stop the violence, explaining that they are against violence, and delivers a powerful kick to her opponent. He reports that her abilities in close combat surpass even his, and that you can't expect much from a battle maid. The girl throws several people into the water. The girl announces that the cleaning is complete. Magnus stands nearby and watches. The man says the sea spares no one, someone dies here, so in any case you need to raise your heads, and if you can save someone, then save them, that's all. A woman with a child says that she is the wife of Felix, the head of the Azuri Guild, Hannah, and says that no matter what, they are very. Magnus says it's more accurate to say former leader. Magnus explains that Azuri is one of the guilds belonging to the Federation. The young woman explains that the mistake is due to the mistakes of past generations and asks if he's the chief's wife, why were his own people chasing him, and whether he decided to flee Nelf Island or something similar. The man says he apologizes. The girl reports that her husband was killed. Magnus tells Felix. The girl announces that she has a proposition for them. The man and other men in the background look at her in surprise. The man explains that they possess all the necessary abilities to guarantee Ms. Hannah's safety. Arya reveals that she is the daughter of Marm from the Lacusta Merchant Guild, and they have come to establish trade relations, so she proposes teaming up if everyone is willing. Arya explains that they will help with goods, and Magnus reports that the Marm Guild is one of the most competitive guilds even in Lacusta, and they couldn't ask for more. The girl says that there are indeed a lot of mosquitoes on Nelf Island, and Magnus explains that you can catch an infection from them. The girl responds. He explains that the barai fruit doesn't grow on this island, so it has to be brought here by ship to stock up in sufficient quantities, and that it seems the Azuri Guild is responsible for harvesting, transporting, and selling it. The girl asks if they have a monopoly, to which he replies. Magnus reports that Felix has decided to buy more barai fruit than usual, and that Hannah's current husband is therefore at peace. He explains that they clashed with Yotel's opinions. Yotel says that raising the price will increase profits, while Magnus explains that they will sell them. The man reports that Yodel has resorted to extreme measures and taken over the guild. The man explains that Yodel should be around here right now. He says he thinks he can just walk around here as if nothing happened and act tough. The man. Magnus says these are the very same beret fruit reserves and that they've worked hard to procure such a quantity. The man says they're busy and orders Magnus to leave for now. The man explains that this is precisely why it would be a great loss to sell these reserves so cheaply, and laughs. Then the man. He says their permission isn't necessary at all, and if they have goods and buyers, it won't be trade. The man asks if he means to say his ship has cargo, and explains that the ship's waterline tells a different story. One glance is enough to tell that the ship is carrying cargo. The top right panel announces that this is the founding guild of Azuri. In the upper right, a man shouts that he's selling barai fruit and urges people to hurry, otherwise they'll all be sold out. In the lower left, a man warns that there are record numbers of mosquitoes this year, and if not, the caption states that this is the Azuri Guild's main headquarters, the port warehouses. Magnus says that in the future they will trade throughout the island, but will initially be located along the coast. Magnus then explains that there is no actual counter yet, but when it comes to essential goods, there's no need to lie. He reports that the fruit wasn't for sale and asks if the man decided to take a walk. The man responds rudely. He says he knows it's the katri tree, a repellent that grows in Lacusta, and suggests they definitely try their product, adding that the man can laugh as much as he wants. The man says Lacusta is too far away, and the goods are heavy, and unless they sell at a loss, the price for the locals will be prohibitive. He doesn't know how they managed to smuggle so much wood undetected, and asks how long the situation will last if they sell the goods for next to nothing to attract more people. Magnus says they won't even be able to recoup their costs or make any profit, so it's best to part ways. The man says they need to pack up shop and leave the island, calling his interlocutors amateurs. He says that the rival, trying to avoid competition, has begun to quietly promote its goods outside of Nelf. He says that in this case, they can safely begin trading outside the port, and besides, the rival has already lost half of its workers. The woman with the child admits guilt, and the woman says they're traitors. Magnus says Hannah forgave them, so their opinions are irrelevant. The girl says she wants to learn new tricks from the policeman who managed to track down the spy. The man explains that in just a few days they managed to completely dislodge the... He reports that word of the country wood has spread throughout the island. He says it's delivery time. A man with a cart of firewood is driving through the dimensional gate. Magnus explains that the inflated price of fruit also played into their hands, as did the abundance of mosquitoes, and he's sure Felix must have had a hard time getting the guild's sales up and running. The man shouts that he's panicking. Magnus explains that he simply wiped his feet on everything. The man begs Magnus to buy their lamb and promises to sell it at a rock-bottom price, while the woman asks Magnus to save them. He says that as long as the man's eyes are black, he won't trade with them. The top right text identifies this as Hannah's mansion. The man explains that a young priest named Magnus and his daughter are to be killed, emphasizing that the girl's mother must also be killed. The bottom left indicates that the man is the criminal Kessel. He says that it was Kuzio-sama's order and that they should be grateful to Kuzio. The man confirms that he understood Magnus. The man says it's just like without him, their day has finally arrived, a moment he's been waiting for. The man says he'd like to thank everyone on behalf of his husband. The woman says, "Good evening, gentlemen." Magnus says, "Let's get started." It says next to it that this is the strongest maid. The man tells her she's a killing machine and will shred them all with every attack. The man explains that they need to get rid of her. The man strikes with a thunder sword. The man screams, and the girl dodges his blow. The girl says she's such a sweet maid and doesn't understand why he's being so aggressive. The man responds with bewilderment. The man asks for help and forgives him, and the girl says that it's a pity because she's not a monster. The man says she's a little girl and orders them to quickly surround her. The man shouts for them to move forward and not stand still. The man says that if they don't do it now, someone will do it for them, and orders them to kill Magnus and bring his head. The girl tells Magnus that they are very persistent and asks what to do with them. Magnus says that some unfriendly guests have arrived. He says he'll have to greet them himself, otherwise there'll be a riot. He then explains that he's using a forceful voltage shock. The men below are terrified and shocked by what's happening. The man says thunder is the most powerful magic. Then he says thunder is something and asks what it means. The girl says thunder shouldn't be a delight, but the sound is soothing to her ears and exquisite. The men flee, the Kanju police arrive, and one of them announces that Genkuhan is the current criminal and won't be able to escape, ordering everyone to drop their weapons and put their hands behind their heads. The man reports that Magnus has a report. The man asks Lawrence why the dog is here. Lawrence explains that they're going to inspect the mansion this evening, so if there are any issues, they need to be addressed. The man warns her not to resist, or he'll stab her, while the other man chokes to death. Magnus thanks the girl for her help, saying they couldn't have done it without her, and she replies that he should be the one thanking her, since thanks to him, they managed to catch many criminals. He reports that, according to the manual, Lawrence was nicknamed Hohonkin, because thanks to his strength and intelligence, he caught many criminals, making him one of the best police officers in his country. He says it's strange that the interlocutor used a sword, even though there are mages here, which is too suspicious. The interviewer. Magnus reveals that he has no choice but to pray for them to improve, and explains that he truly is the best of the best. He says that no matter how powerful they are, the law is the law. The man says that, as expected of a law enforcement officer, he looks so serious that he can say this with confidence. The man orders them to move forward, to which the group agrees. The girl asks what happened between them, and Magnus explains that it's all about NCIS. It's said that the Fukushima family has served this organization faithfully since time immemorial, and time after time they've prevented rebellions among the bandits, thanks to which peace and order reign here. This organization can even deal with the renmei, the very essence of the naval police, and therefore the state has placed its complete trust in this organization. Magnus says she's not as weak as they think and asks her to wait, as she seems to have misunderstood him. The woman calls Lawrence by name. Lawrence says he's sorry about what happened. The woman calls Lawrence by name again. He asks if they're in a committed relationship, and the girl counters that they're not. The woman with the child explains that she was proposed to and engaged when she was 20, but now everything is fine because she has the most wonderful husband who gave her a child. Magnus explains that they're keeping it under wraps right now. He says business on the island is going full steam ahead, but not particularly difficult. Magnus says that, frankly, the story has changed a lot. He ponders why Lawrence left home and went away, noting that he says that until they find him, they will not be able to cooperate with the government. The woman says that they will not be able to cooperate with the government. The man names the child Rico and asks if he can become the successor to the Pirate King. Magnus says they're unlikely to get a straight answer now and wants her to think about it. He admits he's been a bit distracted and wonders if the child will be able to become an heir. The girl says she can, of course, refuse outright, but promises she'll be safe. A woman with a child asks Magnus if this could be their destiny. He says there's no doubt they'll become allies and that the woman hasn't refused. The woman explains that she understands and will think about it. The girl explains that this is a book that can change the world. Magnus explains that it is the most powerful mage who uses a strategy guide. The girl explains that it's all planned out and understands that he wants the best, but this way things could turn out differently and could destroy many industries. He says it's illegal income and asks why. Magnus says, oh, then explains that he couldn't have imagined it and that he was making money without thinking about anyone else. The man explains that there are so many different directions in one industry and they could lose everything, asking if Magnus understands. Magnus replies, no. He says there are no problems with profit so far and suggests considering his proposal. The girl explains that, following this strategy, Magnus will succeed. Magnus says that if this continues, they'll reach the top, and the girl says that the people who came up with this strategy are simply impeccable and they've only come out on top. Magnus explains that this is all their effort. The text explains that the rubber tree is the rarest tree that. He and the girl with 2 buns of hair expressed joy. The woman says she trusts them completely. The woman says she's ready to cooperate with them, and he thanks her. A few days later, the man orders her to remain alive. Magnus is surprised and asks why. The Toshikai leader, Anemone, demands to know if he is Magnus. The girl reveals that it is the Toshikai leader, Anemone. The woman addresses Anemone and identifies her as the leader of the Toshikai group. He says that with the help of foreign buyers, they can become rich. The woman asks him to tell her in detail. The guy answers her, starting to speak, but pauses. The next day, the Lake of Death is reported to be located on Bagadard Island. Magnus says there are no objections. The woman asks what the black, sticky substance is. Magnus explains it's natural tar. He explains that many interesting things can be made from tar, and that they could even open a whole rubber factory, and suggests they collaborate. The man says it's very strange and asks why he decided to go into business. The man explains that they don't know the composition of the sticky substance, so it's risky. The 2 women explain that their goal is to make money, and there's no point in engaging in unprofitable business. Magnus explains that he's doing this to defeat the Demon King. The man responds by shouting that he doesn't believe it. He says that at least he's not sitting idle, and adds that this is a good chance for her too, so he asks for her forgiveness. The woman remains silent and looks at him in surprise. The woman says she's never regretted being born a woman, but now this whole situation is a bit of a bummer. She agrees to cooperate. Magnus asks for forgiveness. He tells Anemone to raise her head. He explains that it's true that they accidentally interfered with trade matters, but if Anemone cooperates with them, it will be wonderful, then there will be a better chance of building trusting relationships with everyone. He asks if she agrees. Anemone agrees. The man explains that the hard work with tourists is very tiring. Magnus and the girl listen, and the girl says she knows the cause of this illness. The man exclaims that even the doctors in Guava don't know how to treat it. He says he has a small business and can deliver the necessary groceries and is also willing to sell them wholesale. The girl says it would be better to start eating pork and grains, listing rice, wheat, and corn. The man explains that he's not asking for an answer right now and suggests thinking about it. Magnus says to imagine that a different crop will appear on Guava Island. The man says there don't seem to be any problems, but still, the woman explains that they were so convincing everyone about the quality of the products. He says this material, which has never been sold, has thin but hard-structured trunks, and they are very difficult to process. He wants to test it. The man agrees to the terms and says fine, fine. He orders the pork and grain to be delivered here. Magnus announces that he will destroy the pirates if they cross their path. Magnus and the girl stand nearby, and Magnus tells them to tell him this. The man reacts to this with a surprised expression. He says he must always be prepared for an attack, and thanks Anemone for her help. Anemone explains that if he displays his fleet, the pirates will take it as a challenge, and it's better to meet only one ship. She also advises that even if he attacks, he must retreat first. Magn. The woman says that anyone who defeats the Demon King is capable of something more than that, calling it cool. Magnus says he feels a little embarrassed when he's praised. A man with a telescope shouts to the captain that he sees several enemy ships. He says, "Let's get the fun started," and the girl says it seems the pirates are having bad luck today. The man warns the boys to be ready. He explains that they might have cargo and asks if they think they're prey. The man remarks that he doesn't think so. Magnus says that if they were truly afraid, they would have dropped the load and sailed away, and wonders if they could catch up. Magnus confirms that they certainly can, and explains that they'll have to use the sea breeze bell, a magical object excavated from the ruins that, when shaken, allows. The man laughs and says everyone's already got busy. The woman says that being able to control the sea breeze is an interesting thing and a real godsend for a sailor. The man says it's the wind and orders them to act quickly. Magnus says, "Captain Morgan." The man asks if he knows him. Magnus explains that he's seen the captain a couple of times. He's a fairly well-known pirate that the NCIS hasn't been able to catch. The man says they need to shoot at the ship simultaneously. He explains that if they shoot at one at a time, they'll miss. The man and he draw their bows and aim at the ship moving through the water. A man says it's useless. Another man orders a counterattack and to keep an eye on the enemy. The man with long hair and the man next to him are surprised and say the wind is magical. The man mentions that there are also oncoming waves and expresses surprise. Magnus orders all the wizards to attack with full force. The wizards shout the name of Elfren Ren's spell and raise their spears. He says it's Elfren Ren. 3 hooded men shiver in the cold. Magnus announces that he has summoned a water dragon, which appears above the fleet of ships and begins to attack. The hooded man screams in terror. A man reports that the fire has spread and the water is unable to contain it. The man explains that the fire has quickly engulfed everything around it, and people are trying to escape by jumping into the water. The man describes the scale of the fire, while a group of people below express horror and fear as they watch. Magnus says he's glad they accepted the challenge, then runs quickly across the deck of the ship. A man shouts where he's going, and another man calls him by his name, Magnus. The man and woman express fear. The 3 men are surprised. He jumps from the ship's mast. He reports that Shogun Maharashi's boots provide high speed from Haidar Jamutan and use this combination. Magnus informs that this combination allows one to move through the air. Magnus casts the spell, Sunder the Fourth. A man and a boy watch in horror. The man reports that the ships are burning and sinking. The man explains that a pillar of fire is rising. The man says that the ship is engulfed in flames and exploding. A man says it's a human and asks what it is. Another man explains that a human can't do that. The man explains that he controls the wind, levitates, and summons thunder, calling it some kind of deity. The man prays and asks the god of thunder and wind to help them. Magnus announces that the game is over and explains that the pirates were captured and were so terrified that they jumped off the ship, and also says that it was a piece of cake. He says that the Pirate King's treasure has never been seen. The top text states that they've decided to set a meeting. Magnus, a woman, and 2 girls walk forward, and Magnus states that they've decided to set a meeting. The woman asks if they're Azuri. Soundgormus says it's a strange woman. The girl confirms this is true and reveals that she is Felix Hannah's wife. The woman reports that her husband died recently. The man asks where Felix is, since he can't see him, and asks if the woman is now managing his lands, after which he says that she definitely is. Magnus says this bastard is the 2nd highest ranking officer in this country. The man laughs and asks who Magnus is. Magnus tells him the man is a strange man. He says that Hannah is a noble woman, and the interlocutor shouldn't talk to her like that. The man replies that he knows how to talk and asks what a person like him would do to him. The man says that's why they don't dare teach him. Magnus says that only the grave will straighten out the hunchback. The man expresses his indignation at the insolence directed at him and strikes. He says there is a lot of noise, but no fight. Kinkori Shokai, Peter Joseph reports that the ship has just arrived. A man says he hopes there were no accidents. Another man, addressing him, says he's already here and asks why they didn't warn him immediately. Magnus reports that once he saw how many wizards were in Captain Mangan's army and how exactly his new strategy worked, He realized that the likelihood of the captain collaborating with a large organization or alliance was extremely high. He announces that he must do two things at this meeting: announce his true intentions to everyone and upset all of Kyujo's plans. The head of the trading company, Zale Pauli, says it's been a while since he last saw him and apologizes for keeping him waiting. The man explains that there's nothing new, and he's back. Magnus reports that the party leader has too many enemies and is worried that he will be killed if he leaves the island. He reveals that another name for the Zale company is a pirate trading company. He explains that several decades ago, another war broke out between Zale and Cagliostro, caused by pirate robberies committed by one of the former heads of Zale, but relations between the two sides soon returned. Magnus says that Mr. Felix has definitely left them, and he had great respect for Mr. Felix and was also touched to learn how good traders can be. The man says he feels very sorry for Mrs. Hannah. He explains that his way of thinking is suspicious, but rather unusual. He informs her that if the woman wishes to join their company, every employee will do everything to protect her and her son. The woman apologizes and says that she is very grateful for the kind words but must decline because the woman says that in that case she will pray for Magnus's success and asks how. Magnus explains that, apparently, in order to restore his company's operations, he has merged with Malmi's company. He looks at them with wide eyes, then narrows them. The man with the beard and the cat watch tensely. The man with the mustache and the man with short hair are sweating and looking worried. The woman with long wavy hair is also tense, and the man with curly hair looks. A man with a beard asks if he can get a word in edgewise. Magnus replies that, of course, he can. In the background, several men listen in. The man explains that he is a great wizard, called the Demon Lord Slayer, and asks why Magnus would trade in the waters of Kazuyu. He explains that to defeat one of the 8 demon generals, he needs the Sword of Waves, the man with the mustache. The man says he won't be able to fool him, the swindler. The old man says, Magnus asks for forgiveness and asks if they could give up on this. The woman says that he is not an enemy, but not a friend either, and asks her to give up this idea. He watches silently, folding his arms. Magnus announces that they will have to make one of the heads of the trading companies the Pirate King. The man tells Magnus that his trading method can be called revolutionary. The man repeats that it's incredible. The woman explains that he has no right to make one of those present, or perhaps even her boss. Magnus says he's not that arrogant and apologizes for interrupting, offering to continue. The man asks, "Pirate King?" The man explains that the person who becomes the Pirate King will live a life of luxury. The man with long hair explains that this will cause a lot of trouble for the other 8 leaders. The man with a mustache asks if they could please give up on this idea. He says that's understandable, but killing one of them. Magnus explains that this should bring more profit than loss, and asks if trading in a peaceful world wouldn't be much easier. The man calls Magnus's point reasonable, then invites his colleagues to unite under the banner of the Malm Trading Company and present gold bars to the Great Siren. The girl and woman listen, while the boy looks down thoughtfully. The man with long hair says that if they team up, they can definitely do it. The man with a mustache explains that in exchange, Mr. Magnus will destroy one of the demon generals. The man with long hair says, "Let's make young Link the Pirate King, and then return." The woman agrees with Mr. Peter, and he says it's done. The man also agrees, explaining that he can't agree despite his respect for Mr. Peter. The man asks why Polly is doing this and says he sees no benefit in it. Polly explains that she doesn't like it and suggests they judge for themselves, reminding him that Mr. Magnus said he needed the sword to kill the general. The man with the mustache wonders what the point of killing is. The man with the mustache explains that to kill the demon lord, they'll need something first. The girl asks what first. He says they'll have to sacrifice their own finances to kill the general. The woman explains that it's not very profitable. The man with the mustache adds that there's another, rather significant, advantage. A man asks Magnus how many demonic generals he's killed so far. A girl and a maid listen attentively. Magnus says it's only 2. The man protests that this is unacceptable. Magnus explains that it's rude, but it's possible he could die on his journey, and now they have no way of knowing how long it will take to kill the demon lord. The man says that as his boss's deputy, he has to refuse. The woman says that if it weren't for him, she wouldn't be here, and insists their money won't go to waste. The man asks, what about the others? The man with the mustache says he thinks that's all. The man asks him to wait. The girl says Magnus is very strong and is confident he can defeat the demon lord, while the other girl confirms and urges him to have faith in Master Magnus. He says that Arya is a school and explains that they're calm when it comes to trade, but now they're protecting him with all their might. He asks the girls to calm down and says that thanks to them, he can keep his cool. The woman asks, "Oh, come on." The girls sit silently. Magnus says he vows to use all his strength to kill the demon lord, but he's not strong enough to guarantee it. He explains that since he can't promise it, he believes he'll have to kill the general without the Sword of Will, and asks if he's right. The girl says something happened. He says he's glad she understands and apologizes for his harsh choice of words when explaining it. Magnus agrees with Polly's proposal. Magnus pats the cat on the head and says that it's excellent. He says that everyone else also supported Polly's option. A man and an older man raise their hands in agreement. The man asks if they'll say anything. The text says that after this conversation, other topics were discussed, but overall, nothing serious happened at this meeting. The man from the last panel apologizes for not being able to help. Magnus listens. In the Book of Peace, Mr. Peter is described as polite yet strict and conservative. He says that his trust alone was worth coming to this meeting. He says he's too kind, and Mr. Peter explains that if there's anything he can do to help, he'll do it. Magnus says he wouldn't pass up the opportunity to trade with people like Georg, even over trivial matters like a grudge. Georg says he hopes Magnus isn't upset with him, and that while he may have disappointed Magnus, he nonetheless expects cooperation. He asks if he wouldn't mind paying a visit tomorrow, and says he'd be happy to host guests. The man bids Magnus farewell until tomorrow. He notices the man. The girl says the lady isn't to blame, and the blame lies with the people who mocked him. Magnus says it's really beautiful, and he's in a great mood. The girl says it's amazing, Magnus, and the water is so clear. The text says it's the beach on Doman Island. The man says they should thank Sir Peter again. The girl confirms this is true, and adds that he lent them such a magnificent private beach and even a holiday home. The girl laughs and thanks the man, and he explains that they are in the sea, so she wouldn't have gotten hurt. Magnus says yes, that's right. The girl asks where he's going. Magnus explains that he's tired and needs a rest. The man says that shouldn't they have enjoyed themselves to the fullest, and asks her not to grab him like that. He explains that it's because she's touching his back. The man says that's impossible since they have too little information, and asks if he thought about it after the conference. He tells. The man says they've already confirmed that the Kinkori company is clean. He explains that, as head of the assembly, he would earn more by engaging in honest trade than by operating behind everyone's back. The girl says that, firstly, they can be absolutely sure of that. Magnus reports that Polly seems very suspicious, and this concerns the ZIL company he represents, and he's also concerned that the leader couldn't attend. The girl says she realizes Magnus has already narrowed down his search and believes that attending that conference was worth it, Magnus explains. He reports that Sir Jorg's entry has disappeared. The girl says that can't be true if the encyclopedia decided so, and asks if this means he's no longer a key figure. Magnus says he doesn't even want to think about what that means. He reports that there are new records of a key figure who wasn't here yesterday. Magnus explains that this is the new leader of the Centonich company. His name is Hans, Sir Jorg's first son and successor. He says he doesn't know, but everything will change, and it will upend the entire alliance. The girl says that Kizu is a fairly common name. She asks who Kizu is. The girl explains that he became the leader after killing Jorg Kizu. The text states that the alliance. The top right corner says Montserrat is a British overseas territory in the Caribbean. Magnus says that's terrible. The girl says that the main building is home to K. Kaliostol. He announces that they are finally here and explains that they will act calmly, as agreed. The men line up on either side of the building's entrance. Magnus says they're truly diligent to have arrived so early and asks if they've just arrived on the island, suggesting they relax instead of rushing. The man explains he didn't come to listen to Magnus's nonsense, but to arrest him on suspicion of. He says, not quite. The man asks if he looks surprised and if he's been thinking about his actions. The man explains that since he couldn't reach an agreement, he had to kill him. He reports that immediately after the conference with Sir Jorg, they worked out the details of cooperation on Montserrat Island. The woman reports that Mr. Jorg was attacked and killed by a hooded figure with a fire spell in the middle of the day in public in the city center, and the spell was so powerful it charred his bones. Magnus recounts that one of the Kaliostol sorcerers said that what would happen. He says that this cannot be the best evidence, and asks Sir Lawrence to think about it, explaining that if he were the culprit, he would never kill someone in public with something that could easily be traced to him, and that this seems like a clear way of saying that he is the culprit. Magnus says it's a very simple move, and explains that the other man deliberately chose an irrational method to kill him, and he's seen smart criminals make mistakes many times. Magnus says that's not enough to prove his innocence. He reveals that the culprit is Kyuju's confidant, whose name is Kijuyu, and explains that he is a mysterious man from the magical city, a sorcerer named Neves. The man explains that Neves can transfer his mind into the bodies of animals, and it's a lost spell he hasn't seen before. The man explains that there was a cat that always followed Sir Jork, and it's one of Nevis's familiars. Magnus says he won't run away and won't. He says he's a guardian of the law. The man orders everyone to arrest him, and he shouts, Shire Espel. The upper right corner depicts people falling and collapsing to the floor. Magnus reports that it doesn't work on him. He explains that the sword, given to the first ruler of Cagliostro by the pirate king of the south, grants magic resistance to its wielder and calls it the magical item, Spirit. He says he's impressed with Sir Lawrence, but wonders if his mind is strong enough to withstand it. The man asks if he could win in hand-to-hand combat and says they'll find out soon. He turns to Chokla and asks her to leave it to her, explaining that Magnus informs her that the girl is the only one who can fight Sir Lawrence and asks if he can count on her, Chokla. The girl explains that this is Master Magnus's request and that only she can do it. The girl says, you have to stay focused, and says it's still a little scary when it comes to it. Magnus says hop and uses the shredding fang move. The girl says that there is. The man makes a swift lunge at the girl, who tries to dodge. The man strikes hard, and the girl screams in pain. He notices this and calls out to Chokla. Magnus tells her not to show off and just fight carefully, as the girl has gotten too carried away. The girl thanks Master Magnus and says that she will dedicate the rest of her life to saving them. He tells her to stay on defense, and he casts buffs, improving her strength and speed. The girl feels the love of Master Magnus. He explains that this is Blade Flash. The man exhales. Magnus explains that even if it was done to maintain order in Kajiu, they were the ones being cruel. The man says that if he was truly falsely accused, he has every right to be angry. Magnus explains that the preparation paid off, he's glad Lawrence is being honest, and he says he will look forward to it, Sir Lawrence. The man gradually falls asleep. The girl informs them that they are now heading to an island where sea gods live. Magnus silently looks ahead. The woman tells them that a major battle awaits them before reaching the island, and they already know about it and are prepared for it. He apologizes for ruining their fantasies. The man tells Magnus that his ship has already been captured by Cagliostro and that they have heavy security. Magnus informs him that if Cagliostro is interrogated, he will simply say that Sir Magnus took him by force. Then Magnus laughs and says he will gladly accept the offer. The man says that many ships from Cagliostro are sailing after them now and reminds them that he is still wanted. He reports that even when they stopped at Barenbow Island, he saw that they had already posted wanted posters for him there, but since it is a small island, the people there. The man says they can keep their distance from the Cagliostro fleet and allow them to follow them. The man sees Andel's Island. The man announces that their fleet is ahead. The man explains that there are not 20, but more than 50 ships. Magnus stares ahead silently. A girl asks what's going on, and he explains that it's a fleet prepared by Kyujo. From bottom right to left, a girl says she was somewhat expecting this, and the man says there are a few more of them than expected. From top left, a girl asks him why he's so calm. Magnus explains that he deliberately let Sir Peter and Sir Lawrence know they were heading for Andel's Island, and also because he knew the information would reach many ears, including Kyujo. The girl asks for Mr. Lawrence to start pursuing them with his. He explains that it's something resembling a divine siren spirit with a trident in hand, and that it's the Kyujo fleet. A girl with 2 buns on her head says that the Janav company is also in their way, and another girl says that this Mr. Gourmez is a neg. According to the encyclopedia, there should be several other groups who want to prevent them from obtaining the treasure, but only 2 of them have come here. Magnus reports that these groups have the ability to gather information, make quick decisions and take action, and possess the power and wealth to control an entire fleet. He says that the fleet prepared by Kyujo has exceeded his expectations. The man reports that there are only a few people who fit the description, which shows how influential Kyujo is. The man asks what to do with the white flag. Magnus remains silent. Magnus tells them to let him on board and says he wants to hear them out. Alice says she's from Loxon. He says it's a ghost company with a fake name, but they're not without guts. Magnus says it's a pleasure to meet Madame Alice. Magnus asks if he could find out why such a huge fleet is here. Alice asks him not to play dumb and says she's looking for Mr. Magnus. Magnus explains that they're simply visiting the island of Andelese, and it's just a small. The woman reports that they outnumber their opponents, and if they surrender now, they will be able to avoid an unnecessary conflict and will not have to shed blood in the seas of Kaju. The woman asks him to make a wise decision. Magnus thanks her for her concern, but says he will visit the island and explains that if he is hindered, he will reach his destination by force, specifying that more precisely, Kizu Nebula. The woman panics and tells him what's going on. He reveals that the woman is Kizu, a talented level 21 sorceress who has been secretly working for Kyuji throughout Kajiu, the real killer of the Santana Company leader, whose murder was blamed on him. Magnus tells her to come back and tell her about Master Kyujo, clarifying that he's here. The girl replies that he even knows about Master Kyujo. He says he also wants to avoid any bloodshed, but if they interfere, he shouldn't expect mercy. He explains that he's in no position to spare them, given that Kyujo has prepared so many ships. The woman says she wants to know if Magnus truly wants to fight, and if he's sure he won't regret it, and Magnus replies that those are his words. The bottom panel shows a boat with two men rowing toward a large ship on which a woman stands. The girl asks if they can just let her go. He says there are villains here, and there's no reason to give in to them. The man explains that he's not one to crave carnage. He says that if they're so eager to play with fire, he has no choice but to. Magnus says a battle is about to begin. The woman says a major naval battle is about to begin. The man looks ahead with a serious expression. As a massive fleet approaches, the battle is announced. He explains that he's been trying to stop the ships with a bell for a while now. A girl asks why they're still moving, and another girl asks if he wants to stop them with a bell. The man says that stopping the enemies in the first place would be unprofitable, and the girl asks if that's true. The man explains that it's more important to increase their speed than to pay attention to the enemy's speed. The man explains that if only 20 people tried to invade the fortress, it would be a problem. Then the man uses. The girl asks if this is Mr. Merritt's power. The man says he knew the plan, but didn't think it would happen so quickly. The man explains he's finished creating a water golem and asks to accept it. It's Merid. Magnus explains that the bracelet can be used to command Merid, placing Merid under the ship, and it will swim at unprecedented speed. Magnus reports that they are being attacked from behind and says they will definitely break through. He announces that it is their turn now and calls Hadia and Selima. One of the girls tells Magnus to trust them, while the other says they'll give it their all and repay him for saving his life. The man explains that this is what God said when he granted him a shield from all arrows. A volley of arrows is shown in the background, flying toward the ship. The upper right-hand side depicts a fiery phoenix attacking ships, accompanied by the inscription, Fire IV. In the upper right-left corner, lightning, inscribed Lightning 2, is seen striking a ship. In the center, an explosion is shown, along with numerous arrows flying toward the ships. Magnus says that if this were a normal naval battle, he would have already surrendered, and talks about Kyujo and his sixes. He informs that this is no ordinary battle. He tells the people to hold on tight so as not to fall out. Enormous water dragons appear on the sea, rising from the water and creating powerful splashes near the ships. A man says they are breaking through, and at the same time another man says they will hit the allies like this. The man, the boy, and the other man scream that this is impossible and that they can't believe what's happening. Magnus announces that he and the girl are ready to fight and explains that they won't let their enemies destroy their world. The man says that they can't win, and he says that there are some monsters. Magnus reports that they have finally met. The man admits defeat and declares victory, then asks for his henchmen to be released. He says Kyujo is a surprisingly nice guy. The man explains that Polly is from the Zill Company. The man explains that he's not a direct descendant of the Pirate King, and if he can't succeed him, no one else will. The man explains that his grandfather used to say this when he was still a boy, and it stuck with him like a curse. Magnus reports that when they set sail for the shores of Ainley Island under the leadership of the director of the Zill Company, they encountered a terrible storm, and when he recovered, he was already on the island's shore. Magnus explains that only they were saved. It is said that those artifacts are guarded by the spirits of the ocean, awaiting the king's successor. It is said that she confesses her love again and waits until then, and her wait is eternal. Magnus says it's a real treasure and he won't give it to anyone, suggesting they laugh at him. He says he'd even risk his life for it. He says that thanks to a trick Polly pulled off at a company directors meeting, Encyclopedia considered him a threat and gave him a ton of information. Then it was a piece of cake arresting Kyujo's gang and handing him over to the Cagliostro. After that, he allowed. Magnus asks what he wants in return. The man replies that it's a small matter and explains that he will take responsibility for all the crew's sins, as his men were only following orders. He asks if Magnus agrees to this condition. He says that Polly is a strange guy and asks why he suddenly cares so much about the crew. Polly says that his grandfather said that a true pirate cannot show mercy to enemies and monsters, but he cannot betray the loyalty of his comrades. He reports that it turns out that even the woman says they can't sacrifice themselves for Mr. Kyujo. Magnus explains that Nebula won't let him escape. The woman says that's no reason to sacrifice. Magnus confirms this and says they should be grateful they got away with it and they have a track record of crime. A man says it's a sea serpent and asks what it is. Two men shout that it's a sea serpent and one of them calls the other an idiot, demanding to take a closer look. The men say it's a water dragon. Magnus reports that this is the work of a local demon general. The man explains that the water dragons were hiding nearby, ready to attack and finish them off. The girl says there are 8 legendary creatures at once. The man is surprised by the appearance of the water dragons. The woman says he's a demon general and asks if he's somewhere around here. The man says even Siren can't defeat a Makai general. The woman reports that he surrounded her with a horde of monsters and wanted to catch her when she ran out of steam. The woman says this is unforgivable impudence and adds, Magnus says he is their target in any case and asks them not to interfere. He reports that in order to keep the ships intact, he will have to fight them himself. Top right, Magnus announces the type, courage, and limit. Right center, Magnus casts lightning of 4. Left center, the dragon makes an aak sound. Bottom, Magnus leaps into a glowing portal. He says that even at high altitude they can get him, and reports that if he flies even higher he won't be able to use lightning. He notices that he has fallen. Magnus casts a spell, activating a jump and a magical shield, which increases his speed and resistance. He says that if the dragon doesn't stop, it will destroy everything around it. He strikes the dragon and explains that it is not going to give up. The snakes produce a whistling sound. Magnus stands on top of a wave of water, surrounded by snakes. He says that, as the encyclopedia said, something happens, accompanied by rustling sounds and the creature's tense gaze. In the upper right corner, Magnus is shouting a draken. The center right announces that it's a level 17 draken, a massive octopus-like monster with dragon heads on its tentacles. In the lower left, several characters watch tensely. He says he's about to start. He creates a powerful vortex of wind, directing it at the giant creature in the water, which makes a whooshing sound. Magnus reports that his plan to lure out General Makai by sending Draken ahead had succeeded, and he wanted to deal with the situation himself. He says he didn't think they would decide to help, and that life didn't prepare him for this. The woman explains that fire and lightning are their weapons. Then they show a dragon leaping out of the water, accompanied by the sounds of stomping and splashing. A creature with a large head and multiple eyes appears in the water. The girl runs quickly. She jumps on the dragon's head and delivers a powerful blow. The dragon reacts sharply to the attack. Magnus says they want to touch him. Magnus reveals that he holds Enhanced Ice 4 in his left hand and Enhanced Stone 4 in his right hand. Magnus runs toward the enemy and begins attacking, creating a powerful whirlwind of ice and stone. A waterspout pierces the head of a multi-headed dragon. The dragon's heads crack and split, one of them becoming encased in ice. He stares forward, focused. 3 people express alarm and point in the direction of what's happening. Magnus announces that he has sealed the monster in an ice crystal, and now it cannot harm anyone. He reports on the unification of the ice mushroom magic. A large crystal floats in the water, making bubbling sounds. A man with 2 companions says, "Oh." Magnus looks at the crystal and says, "Oh." The men on the ships shout that they've succeeded and won. Era says it's great that Polly is still alive and explains that it was a level 37 monster, showing an image in a long-range crystal ball. The girl says it's not fun at all. Magnus says he's not so much happy about defeating the dragon as he is about his comrades' help, and explains that he undoubtedly made a big contribution. Magnus asks how he can look at others with such condescension. He reports that General Makai said he was someone to be wary of. He then says he wonders what will happen next. Cagliostro condemned Magnus and Polly, reporting that Polly had confessed to all the crimes of recent years and was found guilty, while Magnus was found innocent, as his escape from Lawrence was deemed self-defense. Magnus explains that only Polly retained freedom of movement. The man reports that immediately after the trial, Polly convened a meeting with the heads of all the companies. The woman explains and proposes entering into a partnership to achieve his goal. It is reported that the Pirate King's proof was entrusted to the Felix brothers, specifically Lawrence, who was the most suitable candidate for the role of heir. It is said that immediately after acquiring the proof, Lawrence renounced its ownership. Magnus explains that last time he was a pain in the ass, but now they've become allies, and he's quite a reliable guy. Magnus explains that, 100 years after the death of the Pirate King, the man says that, although temporary, they are united again each time. One hand shakes another. The text speaks of peace that drives the era. The inscription points to a temple on the island of Anai. The woman reports that a month has passed since the dragon's defeat. Magnus says that although it took a lot of time in court and meetings, they finally collected everything they needed. The woman asks if the company employees are bringing all the gold needed for the test. Magnus explains that the ability to collect under one's own power. A girl says she's meeting the Holy Spirit for the first time, and another girl says it's like everyone else here. The man stares ahead silently. The woman looks worried. Magnus says this place is the source of water that feeds the entire city. He explains that the water here is clean and fresh and that they can drink it safely. The man explains that this place is hidden from prying eyes and serves as protection for the city. He speaks of the Holy Spirit, the mother of the seas, the siren, and orders him to reveal himself. Magnus says it doesn't have to be so formal and says it's been a while, Polly. The Holy Spirit siren appears. He says that he is honored to be remembered. A smile is depicted on another plane. The mermaid says that holy spirits have never forgotten anything since the beginning of time. The mermaid says that of course she remembers Magnus. Magnus smiles happily, but the girl next to him looks irritated. He says that keeping the entire history of the world in your head is incredibly difficult, at least for people. The man says he has brought two people who want to talk, and Magnus says he knows that Onlei's heir has finally come into this world. The woman reports that the holy spirits have been waiting for Magnus to appear for a long time, and now his wish has come true. The mermaid says, "It's okay, Lawrence." Lawrence says he's not sure he's the heir they need and that he has no desire for wealth. Lawrence explains that Onlay wanted either a strong personality or the unification of his descendants, and he would be satisfied with either outcome. The woman tells him he is the heir they've been waiting for. Magnus says he is honored. The man turns to Lawrence and asks him to accept the title of Onlay's heir and look him in the eye. The elf says to get it, attacking with a spear. He looks at the shield he is covering himself with. Magnus reveals that the knowledge of the diary and the power of the sword will protect Kazuya. The top panels show the tsunami sword, the Pirate King's legacy, and the Pirate King's diary. He says he wants to give the coin as a memento of the Pirate King. The woman asks if the gift is meant for her, then says she understands and thanks him. The mermaid says she hugged her. The man says that when an heir is born, you are doomed to love him as you loved the Pirate King. The woman laughs and says it's all just writer's fiction, and the girl asks, "What you mean, it's not true?" The woman explains that she'll start by saying she wasn't Onlei's love. Magnus says it's true and asks, "What about the legends?" The man asks the mermaid why she's guarding the grave. The woman explains that he was like a son to her, just like Polly, and that she found Onlay one day after the crash, the only small child to survive. She says she raised him until he became a grown man. The man says that with such a teacher, it's no wonder he became. The woman explains that she was told there was a wonderful love story in the legend, but it turned out like this. The man says it's a sudden turn of events. The woman with long hair laughs. Several characters are surprised and puzzled. The woman says she loves all people equally. The girl says that it is the same for everyone. The elf says that this is not at all what they feel when they love. Magnus says that he has the person most dear to him. The girl asks for enough. The girl says she wants him to treat her the same way. He explains that this is what love is. The mermaid says that in that case, she doesn't know love. Magnus says that he doesn't know love. He says he wants the girl to use him. The girl is surprised. He explains that Barak, the demonic general, has made his lair underwater on a sunken ship. He confirms that it is from there that Barak gives orders to his monsters and is able to manipulate people through a traitor. Magnus informs her that the place is directly below them. Magnus asks if the girl has figured out how to use the weapon and says they're counting on her. The girl replies that she's been training a lot. The girl asks the sea to make some space for them. He uses a technique called the tsunami sword. The water around him rises and forms a huge water vortex. Magnus reveals that it is a ship that once belonged to pirates and explains that it sank many years ago and now lies at the bottom of the sea. He reports that according to the Book of the World, the enemy is level 40, the same as Durbanvant. The evil sea demon general Barak says that he has finally gotten to him, as expected of the one who defeated two of his brethren, and laughs. Magnus informs them that even if they've recreated land with the tsunami sword and deprived the enemy of their geographical advantage, they mustn't let their guard down. The girl reminds them that the enemy is vicious, loves tricks, and easily attacks from behind, after which she says she'll be careful. He says that he accepts Sir Lawrence's determination. He says that he has taken note of it and asks that he be left behind in any difficult situation. Magnus informs Gladius that his moment has come. The man laughs and calls for the bastards to come out. Magnus explains that he's clearing the way according to plan and asks him not to worry. He casts the spell, Tilt, Ha Undel Ren, and calls it Territory Expander, Thunder 4 Fee. He explains that he doesn't have an offensive light spell, which is the enemy's weakness, so he resorted to this. Magnus reveals that the jewel of the celestial realm, the Thunderbolt, has fallen from Jatutan, and that his thunder attacks are similar to light attacks, damaging Barak. Magnus then casts the spell, Tilt Ha-Undel Ren, and deals. The skeleton laughs and says he was fried by lightning. He yells at Choclo and Lawrence to act now. He tells them to leave it to them. The skeleton explains that it's a sword with the power of the siren's spirit and says he's busy. The man says that the cheeky little weaklings should come out and greet the guests, calling them bastards. The man says that they are the best pirates of all pirates. The skeletons shout that they are the best pirates of all pirates and order them to plunder, kill, burn, and rape, declaring that every sea in this world belongs to them. The text explains that Barrack's special ability is a pirate war song, which, with the exception of strength and speed, Magnus reports that this is what the pirate battle song means. In just 5 minutes, every skeleton pirate has increased their level to 20. He asks Choclo and Lawrence to hold back the enemies. He orders them to die. The girl hiccups, addressing Magnus. Magnus watches in surprise. Numerous skeletons with swords are attacking a large robot. The woman tells Mr. Magnus that if it means saving him, she doesn't care if she dies. He laughs and asks if she's running away or if she's shy. The demon explains that he won't let her go anywhere. The man screams that Magnus must die. Magnus casts the Tilt Ha Undel Ren spell, causing thunder. The girl screams, noticing something, and looks at the explosion. He says he's glad they're okay and orders them to stay alert, not to sacrifice themselves and to stop crying. He reminds them that the girl had already done something like this in Ramses' pyramid and that he knew. The girl says she regrets what she did and asks if Magnus has any idea how scared he was. Magnus explains that humans are naturally learning creatures. They don't make the same mistake twice, and that's why he was able to save the girl right now. He says that He says the girl is hopeless, and that's true. The girl says that if that's the order, she'll carry it out. He asks if she promises. Magnus says that's an order then. The girl reports that her servant Choclo has engraved his command on his heart. The girl looks at what's happening ahead. The man announces that the pirate's battle song's effect should wear off soon and suggests they finish. The girl says, "Go ahead, sir." He casts the Tilt Ha-Un Del Ren spell, holding Thunder 4-een in his left and right hands. The girl runs forward, then strikes the skull on fire with her sword, causing it to crack and shatter. The girl says, "Right now." Magnus says, "Well done." Magnus makes a powerful leap and delivers an explosive blow, causing explosions and destruction. He says that his end has come, against the backdrop of a crumbling skeleton and a ruined landscape. Eris reports that he even defeated Barak, and that people can be so interesting. The man talks about a crystal ball for long-distance communication. Magnus explains that, as the daughter of the head of a pirate trading company, she's seen all sorts of people, but they've all been boring. He explains that monsters are much more interesting than people, which is why she immediately accepted Barak's offer. Magnus explains that to gain power, all he needs to do is control the situation in Kaiju and avoid. He says that this way he can gain Barak's power after his defeat. He explains that it sounds very tempting to conquer the human race, but the girl says that she can't refuse the opportunity to play with him and offers to unleash true madness. Magnus explains that this is how he ended up in Cagliostro and explains that he's sure it doesn't suit him. Magnus says he's trying to avoid a death sentence. The man asks what's wrong with Magnus and asks if he's trying to avoid a death sentence. Magnus: a woman says a man dear to her heart told her she was out of his league and that he was just a child. Magnus says he's decided to try to love the same country that's so dear to her. He explains he hasn't found any other way. The boy says he understands, although he's not sure a child can become an adult just because they try to live that way. He says there's no need for thanks. He was only able to achieve success thanks to the woman's support, and if she hadn't trusted him, he wouldn't have been able to do anything. The woman says she's deeply indebted to the Azure Company and asks what he's talking about. The woman says it was Magnus and Miss Aria who saved her. The man asks his friends what they think about it. The man says that they too must give Magnus the title of the promised conqueror of the Demon Lord. The woman agrees with Sir Peter. The men say they are ready to do anything to help. Magnus thanks them. A man tells the new Zil representative, Polly's heir, to be more clear, and the man explains that he can't resolve the matter himself. The man says he won't interfere in other people's affairs. The man asks if everything is all right with Zil and where their leader has disappeared to. The girl says that for her, a few months in Kaizu were a kind of vacation because she could be with Magnus. Magnus reports that they received Barak's gold coins as loot, as well as an Orihalcum ingot from a sunken ship, and he'll give B a lift. He tells Miss Aria that she needs to continue traveling with them. Miss Aria explains that after this trip, they will return to their everyday lives and will see each other very rarely, and says that she feels a little sad. The girl asks why, and Miss Aria replies that she can't. The woman explains that, due to the trade agreements they signed after defeating Barak, not everything has been done yet. She explains that even now, many people depend on trade, and she must take responsibility. The woman explains that Magnus has defeated the demon lord, and she too will do her utmost. The girl says that her pride will not allow her to be a burden, and then explains that she will therefore trust Magnus. He says that he is shocked by this way of thinking and is touched. The girl says that she swears on her life, although he said that she can't say that anymore, and in any case, she will try. The man says they're very generous and denies anything, explaining it simply. Magnus asks if they should return to Zill Company. The girl and the woman ask together what that means, and the girl clarifies whether they're traitors and whether the company is hunting them. The man reports that, as expected from Sir Magnus, they see right through them and confirms he was right. The man explains that he is a former employee of the Zill Company, holding a fairly high position and responsible for illegal activities before that job was taken over by Polly. The girl says, the woman reveals that Polly is her nephew, and the man explains that the previous leader was his brother. Magnus says he left his father's company long ago, but he can't let it go under, so he'll take over, at least until a new leader emerges. The man says he won't engage in piracy. The man turns to the girl and tells her they owe her a debt they can't repay. He says he wants the shrimp and crab salad from Blue Sea Sound, and notes that Arya really loves crustaceans. Arya asks if that's bad, and he says it's fine, he likes it too, and they have a really good fish soup steak, he suggests. Magnus says Chocolate is surprisingly calm and asks what's wrong. Chocolate explains that she lost her bra. It was washed away by a wave. Magnus yells, "Triple A." The woman tells Chocolate to go, otherwise he'll get angry. He says he can't and asks Ariel. Chocolate cries and says that if he's abandoned, he'll have no one to rely on, and asks her not to come near him. The upper right corner shows the Earth Drake. Magnus reveals that he is a warrior of light, chosen by Providence, the spirit of Valor Ray, 14 years old. Magnus asks how this happened. He explains that all his friends betrayed him. Ard ran away to save himself. Teresa ran away with. The dragon says he's disappointed. He says he did everything he was told and admits he was wrong. He says he'll pay for that mistake with his life. He yells at them not to give up. He asks who it is. Magnus says his name is Magnus, and he's a traveling martial artist. The top right announces the release of the 8th volume of the manga. He says it's an excellent potion and orders him to drink it. The guy with the wound on his face asks if he's a martial arts master and asks him not to order him around. Then he opens his eyes and asks where he is. Magnus explains that they were transported to Luxt through a city gate, and after Miss Selima healed the boy with magic, they used another city gate to reach Montrever, where the inn is located. The boy apologizes, saying he didn't understand, and remarks, he says it's not worth it, they're glad they made it in time. The man says he's sure the healing magic cost a pretty penny too, and asks if they paid for the hotel room, then asks if he can pay them back. A man reports that he's lost all his money. The man explains that he can't say his partner ran off with his wallet. Magnus says not to worry, he helped because he wanted to. The man thinks he hates suspecting people, but he doesn't want to go through that again. The man thinks. He says that's just the rumor, and says he thought a normal person wouldn't dare fight an Earth Drake. Ray introduces himself, says he's supposedly a warrior of light, and has set out on a journey to defeat the demon General Bullet, and promises to repay with the reward he received. Magnus says his power isn't enough to defeat General Bullet Demon. Magnus says he already has a plan. Magnus explains he'll come up with something. Magnus says he's tired of taking orders from others and apologizes, saying it pains him to say it. He says it may seem like he's up to something, but that's not surprising after what his friends have done. He's confident the other person will join him because he's realized the importance of thinking through and making his own decisions. The other person agrees to join Magnus and asks for permission. Magnus explains that he's been training for a long time using special methods, which is why his stats are above average. He explains that he has no skill in estimating, so it's only an estimate. The man asks if Magnus knows his level and stats. Magnus explains that since they're talking about it, he'll introduce himself. He explains that the Earth Drake was a level 13 monster boss and was very young. The girl asks how he knows his level and is surprised that he's so young. He explains that in battle, it's important to know yourself and your opponent, so naturally he knows everything about the Drake, the girl notes. Magnus says they'll then go after the noble vampire, and the girl says she can attack with light. Magnus says that would be a great help. The girl asks who will lead their group. The man begins speaking, addressing the girl. He says that if a leader is needed, then one can be chosen. The girl suggests not having a leader. He says that they will discuss plans and rules as they go along. Magnus says, then let's discuss how to defeat the noble vampire right away. A powerful explosion occurs at the edge of the forest. Chocolate says the work was excellent, though so easy it can hardly be called work. He thanks Chocolate and informs her that if he doesn't release magic periodically, it will end badly. He then offers to lower his level again, and in doing so, his level drops from 39 to 12. The man announces that from now on they will focus on training Master Ray. Magnus explains that to defeat the demon General Bullet, Ray needs to become stronger. The man explains that according to the Book of the World, the system of this world will not allow for simple increases in power. Magnus says that if RR end, the girl says that the General's Sea Demon Gold Coin will help them, and he explains that if he is 1 or 2 levels higher than Ray, their joint training will be more effective. He says that if Ray knew that he was a level 39 wizard, then in any difficult situation he would turn to. Magnus says it pains him to keep this a secret from him, but it's better if he doesn't know, as it will make the training both physically and mentally better. The girl asks if it wouldn't be more effective if she simply gave him brief and effective instructions. Magnus replies that there's no point in saying that, he knows perfectly well. He says there are no words to describe the pain and sadness of having to go on a mission with such a terrible group of partners. He says he just needs to figure out how to handle it. He explains that while it doesn't seem to have affected Ray much, he must have a very honest,